Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the intricate social structure of ancient China, where each role was as defined as the Great Wall itself. What you're about to discover might surprise you, as hierarchies were more fluid than you might think. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. In the grand theater of ancient history, the Zhou dynasty takes center stage, strutting in with a confidence only a kingdom that's lasted over 790 years can muster. It's like the rolling stones of ancient China, strumming its way through centuries with an unshakable beat. Now, the Zhou weren't just about longevity. They were the architects of a social hierarchy that makes modern celebrity gossip look like a group hug. Let's take a peek behind the silk curtains of this ancient drama. At the top of this social pyramid sat the king, the so-called son of heaven. This guy wasn't just a ruler, he was the cosmic middleman between earth and the divine. Imagine having a job description that includes both ruling millions and keeping the gods happy. No pressure, right? The king wielded the mandate of heaven, a divine right to rule that was as much a political tool as it was a spiritual doctrine. Conveniently, this mandate could also be revoked if things went south, like a cosmic performance review with no severance package. Below the king was the noble class, the kind of folks who'd make the cast of Game of Thrones look like a knitting circle. These were the feudal lords, the ones who held their own fiefdoms, a bit like having your own slice of the Zhou pie. They pledged loyalty to the king, but let's be honest, they were often more interested in playing power games. If you've ever tried organizing a family reunion, you've got a taste of the chaos these nobles could unleash. They were tasked with collecting taxes, raising armies, and generally keeping the peasants in line. Think of them as middle management with an attitude and a penchant for intrigue. Then there was the budding bureaucracy, the unsung heroes, or perhaps the beleaguered bureaucrats of the era. This was the early stage of what would become an elaborate civil service system in later dynasties. These officials were selected for their skills in administration rather than their noble bloodlines, a radical notion for the time. It was like hiring based on talent instead of family connections, a concept some modern workplaces are still catching up on. Now, let's talk numbers. The Zhou dynasty covered a whopping 25 million square kilometers at its peak. That's more than Texas and California combined, folks. Managing such a vast expanse required more than just royal edicts. It took a network of loyal and occasionally not-so-loyal nobles to keep the wheels turning. These fiefdoms functioned like miniature kingdoms, each with its own little court of intrigue. It's no wonder that power struggles were as common as rice in this land of plenty. And speaking of power struggles, the Zhou era wasn't all about peaceful governance and divine mandates. There were enough coups, betrayals, and assorted backstabbings to fill a season of reality TV. The most famous of these was the fall of the Western Zhou in 771 BC, when King Yu of Zhou, in a questionable move, decided to light a series of beacons to amuse his favorite concubine, convincing nearby lords that an attack was imminent. When the real threat came, no one took him seriously. Let's just say it was a classic case of the boy who cried wolf, with the tragic twist of a kingdom falling. This social structure, as rigid as it was, set the stage for future dynasties. It was a blueprint for the complex dance of power and duty that would characterize Chinese governance for centuries. The Zhou played the long game, embedding a feudal system that would evolve into the intricate bureaucracies of later dynasties, including the famous exams that tested officials on Confucian classics, essentially the SATs of the ancient world. In the end, the Zhou dynasty was less about static hierarchy and more about a shifting balance of power. Its legacy is like a masterclass in political maneuvering, where every move was a calculated step in a dance of survival and supremacy. From kings to nobles to bureaucrats, each played their part in a grand performance that would echo through the corridors of history, leaving a blueprint that would guide and confound future rulers in equal measure. It's a tale as old as time, where power is both a gift and a gamble, and the stakes are nothing short of heaven and earth. The Han dynasty, stepping onto the stage after the Zhu's curtain call, had a knack for refining social structures like a master chef tweaking a time-honored recipe. Picture this. It's the year 206 BC, and the Han are about to introduce an intricate blend of Confucian ideals with a dash of centralized bureaucracy. This isn't just another dynasty. It's an empire with a plan. We're talking about a social makeover that would make even the most ambitious reality TV transformations look like child's play. The Han took the Zhu's feudal chaos and said, "Hold my rice wine." They introduced a more centralized approach, with the emperor as the undisputed head honcho. But here's the twist. Instead of just relying on noble bloodlines, they began to value brains over birthright. Enter the Confucian scholars. These guys were like the ancient world's nerdy rock stars, revered for their wisdom and moral compass. Confucius, the philosophical guru himself, had been chilling in the afterlife for a few centuries, but his teachings were about to become the ideological backbone of the Han state. Confucianism preached the virtues of hierarchy, order, and filial piety. Basically, respect your elders and know your place. It was like the ultimate handbook for social harmony, with a gentle reminder not to question authority too much. The Han emperors were smitten with this ideology and saw it as the perfect tool to legitimize their rule. They even established Confucian academies, where budding scholars could study the classics, and if they played their cards right, ascend the social ladder. This leads us to the rise of the scholar gentry class, a group that would come to dominate the political landscape like a well-dressed oligarchy. These mandarins in training were a mix of bookworms and bureaucrats who passed rigorous civil service exams that made today's standardized tests look like kindergarten quizzes. Passing these exams was no small feat. It was akin to winning the lottery, only with more anxiety and fewer scratch-off tickets. But the rewards, oh, they were sweet. Successful candidates not only gained prestigious government positions, but also were granted land and tax exemptions. It was like getting a golden ticket to the chocolate factory, but with more paperwork and fewer Oompa Loompas. However, the path to becoming a scholar official wasn't lined with rose petals. Education was a costly affair. Tuition, books, and living expenses could bankrupt a family faster than you can say Confucian classics. Some estimates suggest that a scholar's education could cost up to 100,000 cash in ancient currency. To put that in perspective, that's more than a year's wage for a peasant farmer. So, while the idea of a merit-based system was appealing, in reality, it was often the wealthy who could afford to invest in their children's education. The playing field was about as level as the Himalayas. The Han dynasty's cunning maneuvering didn't stop at propping up scholars. They were masters at ensuring loyalty, employing a carrot-and-stick approach that would make Machiavelli proud. The state provided scholars with cushy government jobs and land grants, but with a catch. Loyalty was non-negotiable. Any whispers of dissent or ambition beyond one station were swiftly quashed. The Han knew that a stable empire required a delicate balance of power and appeasement, and they played that game with finesse. Economically, the Han dynasty was a powerhouse. With a population swelling to over 60 million, it was one of the largest empires of its time. The economy was a complex web of agriculture, trade, and state monopolies on iron and salt. The government even dabbled in proto-capitalism, setting price controls to stabilize the economy. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life for the average Joe, or should I say, the average Zhang, was still tough. Peasant farmers worked the land tirelessly, their livelihood subject to the whims of nature and the tax collector's pen. The Han's economic policies were a double-edged sword. While they stimulated growth and infrastructure development, they also placed heavy burdens on the lower classes. Taxes could be crippling, and occasionally, rebellions flared up like a bad case of déjà vu. The harsh reality was that while the elite enjoyed the perks of power, the common folk bore the brunt of maintaining the empire's grandeur. The Han dynasty's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas and the intricacies of governance. It laid the groundwork for a civil service system that would endure for millennia, influencing not just China but the world. Yet, beneath the romantic veneer of sage rulers and benevolent governance lay a stark reality. Social mobility was often a mirage, and the costs of maintaining such a system were borne by those least able to afford it. The Han era was a time of both enlightenment and exploitation, where the allure of Confucian ideals masked the inequities of a rigid social structure. In the grand tapestry of history, the Han Dynasty stands out as a period of transformation and contradiction. It was an age where ideas met reality in a complex dance, each step revealing the delicate balance between power and principle. As we continue to unravel the threads of this dynasty, it's clear that the Han were more than just rulers. They were architects of a society that would define an era. And as with any great story, the best is yet to come. Now, let's shift gears from the Han Dynasty's balancing act to the Tang Dynasty's explosion of culture and complexity. If the Han were the architects of a stable society, the Tang were its flamboyant interior decorators, splashing color, poetry, and diversity across ancient China's canvas. We're talking about an era where poets were rock stars, courtesans were influencers, and the Silk Road was the bustling artery of a globalized world long before anyone knew what a global economy was. The Tang Dynasty, reigning from 618 to 907 AD, is often lauded as a golden age of Chinese civilization. But let's not get too carried away with romantic notions. Sure, it was an age of unprecedented cultural flowering, but it also had its fair share of grit and grime. Think of it as the Renaissance with a side of medieval melodrama. At the heart of Tang society was the capital city of Chang'an, a metropolis that made medieval Europe look like a sleepy village. With a population reaching nearly 1 million, it was the largest city in the world at the time. Imagine the bustling markets, filled to the brim with spices, silks, and stories from as far as the Byzantine Empire. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was the internet superhighway of the ancient world, connecting cultures and economies like never before. But let's not gloss over the reality behind the Silk Curtain. While the Tang Dynasty was busy painting the world with its cultural brushstrokes, the peasants were toiling away in the fields, their lives dictated by the whims of nature and the tax collector. Despite the romantic allure of an era where Lai Bai penned verses as effortlessly as he sipped wine, the reality was that most Tang citizens were more concerned with surviving than reciting poetry. Speaking of poetry, the Tang Dynasty was the era where poets were practically celebrities. Lai Bai and Du Fu were the Lennon and McCartney of their time, crafting verses that captured the beauty and brutality of life. Lai Bai, known for his free-spirited verses and love of a good drink, was rumored to have composed some of his best work under the moonlight with a bottle of wine in hand. Meanwhile, Du Fu's poems were more like social commentaries, shining a light on the struggles of the common people and the absurdities of war. Then there were the courtesans, the social butterflies of the Tang court, who wielded influence with the grace of a diplomat and the charm of a raconteur. These women were not merely ornamental. They were savvy socialites who played pivotal roles in the court's political and cultural life. They were the original influencers, shaping trends and opinions while maintaining a delicate balance between power and propriety. But let's not forget the military, the ever-present backdrop to the Tang Dynasty's golden narrative. The empire stretched over 4 million square kilometers at its zenith, and keeping such a vast territory under control required more than just poetic diplomacy. The military was both a formidable force and a constant threat to stability, with generals occasionally flipping the script on their emperors. The Lushan rebellion of 755–763 AD was a stark reminder of this, as a disgruntled general nearly toppled the dynasty, leading to a catastrophic civil war that left millions dead. The myth of Tang cosmopolitanism often overlooks the harsh reality faced by those who kept the empire's wheels turning. Peasants bore the brunt of heavy taxation and corvée labor, while the elite enjoyed the fruits of their labor. The gap between rich and poor was as wide as the Great Wall, and social mobility was a dream more often dashed than realized. The allure of the Tang Golden Age is a testament to the power of narrative, a story spun from silk, yet woven with threads of hardship. Economically, the Tang Dynasty was a powerhouse of innovation, with advancements in agriculture, trade, and technology. The introduction of new irrigation techniques and fast-ripening rice varieties transformed agriculture, while the Silk Road facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technology. China became the world's workshop, producing everything from fine porcelain to intricate textiles. But this prosperity was not evenly distributed. For the average peasant farmer, life was a relentless cycle of toil and survival, their livelihoods tethered to the whims of weather and war. The Tang dynasty's legacy is a paradox, a time of cultural brilliance overshadowed by political turmoil and social inequality. It was a period where the splendor of the court masked the struggles of the countryside, where poets and courtesans danced through history, leaving behind a trail of verses and intrigue. Yet, beneath the surface of this gilded age lay the harsh realities of empire, a reminder that every golden age has its shadows. In unraveling the complexities of the Tang dynasty, we see more than just a tapestry of silk and poetry. We glimpse the unvarnished truth of an era that dazzled with its brilliance and staggered under its burdens. As we delve deeper into this historical drama, we find that the Tang were more than just architects of culture. They were the weavers of a story that continues to captivate and confound. The tale of the Tang is far from over, and as we turn the page, we're left with the tantalizing promise of more revelations to come. As we leave the Tang dynasty's dazzling yet turbulent legacy behind, let's fast forward to the Song dynasty, where the social structure took an ambitious turn. If the Tang were the rock stars of culture, the Song were the nerds who try to hack the social system with meritocracy. Except, like any good plot twist, this story has more layers than an onion, and not all of them smell sweet. The Song dynasty, which reigned from 960 to 1279 AD, was like a grand social experiment gone both right and wrong. They took the concept of the civil service exams and cranked it up to 11, imagining a world where brains could outshine bloodlines. In theory, it was beautiful, an aspirational tale of brains over brawn, where a commoner could rise to the ranks of the elite purely through intellectual prowess. In reality, it was as much a meritocracy as a game of Monopoly is a real estate lesson. These civil service exams were no walk in the imperial park. Picture this. You're a young scholar with dreams of grandeur, staring down the barrel of the Jinshi degree, the highest and most prestigious level of the exams. Candidates had to memorize Confucian classics, write essays, and craft poetry, all while under the watchful eyes of examiners who were about as forgiving as a tax audit. Passing these tests was like getting a PhD at Hogwarts, minus the magic, and with a lot more Confucius. But let's not get too misty-eyed over this supposed ladder to success. The exams were held in grueling conditions, packed into examination halls with hundreds of other hopefuls. Think the SATs, but with more paper cuts and fewer snacks. And while the exams were open to any male, the reality was that education was expensive. A single exam session could cost a candidate's family up to 2,000 strings of cash, roughly equivalent to several years' income for a peasant. So, while the doors were technically open, the bouncers were checking wallets at the gate. Once you passed, assuming you didn't succumb to exhaustion or bankruptcy, you could land a cushy government job. Scholar officials, or mandarins, were the celebrity influencers of the Song era, wielding influence in governance and policy. Yet beneath the glitz of officialdom, the competition was cutthroat. There were simply more candidates than positions, and the exams were notorious for their low pass rates, often less than 10%. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. Moreover, the romantic notion of the scholar official masked a harsh economic reality. Sure, they gained status and a salary, but the empire's coffers weren't exactly overflowing. The Song government, constantly battling external threats and internal corruption, was like a teenager with a maxed-out credit card. Scholar officials faced the unenviable task of balancing the state's demands with their own ambitions, often finding themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. Economically, the Song dynasty was a powerhouse of innovation. They invented gunpowder, pioneered paper money, and developed a bustling market economy. The population boomed to over 100 million, creating a lively urban culture and a demand for consumer goods that would make a modern mall look modest. But this prosperity wasn't evenly spread. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Great Wall, with the rural peasantry struggling under the weight of taxes and natural disasters. The Song dynasty's tale of meritocracy is a classic case of idealism meeting reality. It's a story that resonates even today, a reminder that while talent should ideally trump privilege, the playing field is rarely level. This era was a fascinating blend of aspiration and limitation, where the myth of social mobility was both a beacon of hope and a tantalizing mirage. So, as we delve deeper into the Song dynasty's experiment, we find more than just a tale of scholars and exams. We uncover a society wrestling with its ideals and grappling with the complexities of governance, economy, and social change. It's a narrative as rich and textured as the silk that flowed through its markets. And as we pause here, let's leave the next chapter open for exploration. After all, with history, the best stories are those that keep us guessing, challenging us to look beyond the myth and see the stark, unvarnished truth. As our narrative shifts from the Song dynasty's ambitious meritocratic experiment, we find ourselves standing at the gates of the Ming dynasty, where the social structure of China crystallized into a more rigid form. It's the year 1368, and Zhu Yuanzhang, a former peasant-turned-rebel leader, has just declared himself the founder of the Ming dynasty. Talk about a rags-to-riches story that would put Cinderella to shame. If Cinderella had to fight her way through a civil war, that is. Under the Ming, the imperial examination system reached its zenith and began its slow decline. The exams were like the ancient world's version of an Olympic marathon, grueling, prestigious, and only for those with the stamina and resources to compete. By now, the exams had morphed into an intricate bureaucracy as stifling as a summer day in a Beijing courtyard, with Confucian classics as the unwavering backbone. But here's the kicker. While the exams were meant to be a great equalizer, in reality, they became a fortress of privilege. Only the wealthy could afford the relentless grind of education required to succeed, and the system churned out officials who were more versed in rhetoric than in practical governance. Despite this, the scholar officials enjoyed immense prestige and power, like being the VIPs at the emperor's court. They were the gatekeepers of government, controlling everything from tax collection to policy making. But like a Kafkaesque twist, this power came with a hefty dose of bureaucracy. The red tape was so thick you could practically wrap dumplings in it. The reality was that decision-making often moved at the pace of a snail crossing the Great Wall. Meanwhile, the merchant class was quietly rising, like yeast in a perfectly proofed loaf of bread. Under the Ming and later the Qing dynasty, this class gained unprecedented influence, thanks to the burgeoning trade networks that spread Chinese goods far and wide. Silk, tea, and porcelain flowed along these routes, turning merchants into wealthy power players. Ironically, despite their economic clout, merchants were often looked down upon by the Confucian elite. You see, Confucian doctrine considered them a necessary evil, useful for commerce but morally suspect. It was like being the rock stars of the economy, but getting seated at the kids' table at the family reunion. As the Qing dynasty took over in 1644, the social structure became even more entrenched. The examinations continued to be a cornerstone of governance, but by now they had become a symbol of stagnation rather than innovation. The exams tested rote memorization over critical thinking, and the bureaucracy they fed was as bloated as a pufferfish at a sushi bar. This rigidity left China ill-prepared for the challenges of the modern era, like a ship with a map but no compass. Amidst this backdrop, the merchant class continued to grow in influence, challenging the traditional hierarchy. By the 18th century, merchants were lending money to impoverished gentry, flipping the script in a way that would make Shakespeare's head spin. They became patrons of art and architecture, funding temples and public works, thereby buying a slice of the prestige they were officially denied. It was a delicate dance of power and perception, where money whispered louder than doctrine. The Ming and Qing eras offer a fascinating study in contrasts, where the myth of stability masked the reality of social and economic upheaval. The imperial examination system, once a beacon of meritocracy, became a relic of a bygone era, unable to adapt to the changing tides of history. And while Confucian ideals still held sway, the rise of the merchant class hinted at the shifts that would eventually reshape China. As we tie a bow on this historical saga, it's clear that the legacies of these dynasties are a mix of brilliance and blind spots. The social structures they crafted were both a source of strength and a straitjacket, guiding China through centuries while sometimes holding it back. In the end, the Ming and Qing dynasties were more than just rulers. They were the architects of a society that stood on the brink of modernity, balancing tradition with the winds of change. So, as we put the final touches on this exploration of ancient China, let's raise a proverbial glass to the dynasties that painted this rich tapestry of history. From the Zhu's feudal intrigues to the king's bureaucratic labyrinth, it's been a journey through time that's both enlightening and a touch absurd. We've debunked myths, uncovered truths, and perhaps even shared a few laughs along the way. After all, history is not just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless dance of power, ambition, and human folly. And as we close this chapter, one can't help but wonder what tales the future will tell of our own era. Elizabeth Tudor entered the world with all the fanfare of an unwanted wedding guest, born on September 7, 1533, to King Henry Roman VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, if you think being the daughter of a king sounds like a fairy tale gig, think again. For Elizabeth, it was more like starring in a Shakespearean tragedy with a dash of courtroom drama. Her arrival was supposed to herald the dawn of a new era, a son to secure the Tudor dynasty. But when she turned out to be a girl, Henry's dreams of a male heir were dashed, and Anne's head was quite literally on the chopping block 3 years later. Talk about a harsh performance review. And so began Elizabeth's precarious journey through the Tudor power game. As the daughter of a beheaded queen and a king who went through wives like tissues, Elizabeth's early life could be described as unstable on a good day. She was declared illegitimate after Anne Boleyn's execution in 1536, a move that would have sent most people straight into therapy. But Elizabeth, even in her toddler years, showed a knack for playing the long game. Let's fast forward to 1547, when King Henry Roman VIII finally met his maker, probably weighed down by the sheer volume of marital baggage. His death left the throne to his 9-year-old son, Edward VI. Now, if you think the political climate was tense before, the temperature got cranked up to sauna levels. Elizabeth had to navigate a court that was less Downton Abbey and more Game of Thrones, minus the dragons but with plenty of backstabbing. Edward's reign was short, and let's say, not particularly sweet. He managed to rule for a mere 6 years before succumbing to illness at the age of 15. This sudden vacancy on the throne sparked a royal free-for-all, with rival claims being tossed around like confetti. Enter Lady Jane Grey, a pawn in the Dudley family's ambitious chess game. She was queen for 9 whole days, a tenure shorter than a Hollywood marriage. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's older sister Mary, daughter of Henry and his first wife Catherine of Aragon, seized the throne. Mary wasn't exactly the warm and fuzzy type. Known to history as Bloody Mary, for her zealous persecution of Protestants, she was as fiery as her nickname suggests. Elizabeth, who was Protestant herself, found her life hanging by a thread, literally. She spent time in the Tower of London, on the receiving end of her sister's suspicion. It was a classic case of sibling rivalry with extremely high stakes. In this tumultuous game of musical thrones, Elizabeth had to play her cards right. She had the smarts to keep her head down, figuratively and literally, until Mary's reign ended in 1558. The Queen died childless, and suddenly Elizabeth found herself in the spotlight, the improbable heir to the English throne. Now you might think this was all part of some grand, destined plan. Spoiler alert. It wasn't. Elizabeth's ascent was more about surviving a series of unfortunate events than any preordained path. Elizabeth's reign began in an England that was financially on par with a college student's bank account after a semester of studying abroad, deeply in debt, with religious divisions tearing the country apart. But she was nothing if not resourceful. Elizabeth surrounded herself with savvy advisers, like the legendary Sir William Cecil, who knew a thing or two about fiscal responsibility. Together, they tackled England's budget like it was a particularly stubborn IKEA manual. Now, let's not forget the personal drama. Elizabeth was dubbed the Virgin Queen, a title that's been both romanticized and scrutinized more than a Netflix series finale. The reality is, her decision to remain unmarried was as much a political strategy as it was a personal choice. Marriage could have meant sharing power or, worse, losing it altogether. Elizabeth knew that keeping suitors at arm's length, and there were many, from the dashing Robert Dudley to foreign monarchs like King Philip II of Spain, was her best bet for maintaining control. Speaking of control, Elizabeth had to deal with more than just marriage proposals and budget deficits. In 1562, she contracted smallpox, a disease that had about as much chill as a caffeine-fueled squirrel. She survived, but not without a few scars, both literal and political. Her illness was a stark reminder of the precariousness of her position. With no clear heir, her council panicked, imagining a succession crisis that would make the War of the Roses look like a garden party. Rumors, plots, and outright treason were as common in Elizabeth's court as courtiers themselves. One particularly juicy scandal involved Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, and a perpetual thorn in her side. Mary's claim to the English throne was a hot topic, and Elizabeth had to balance diplomacy with the occasional need for decisiveness. Like when she eventually signed Mary's death warrant in 1587, a move that was both politically necessary and personally agonizing. Yet through it all, Elizabeth maintained her grip on the throne with a combination of wits, charm, and occasional ruthlessness. Her reign, which lasted 44 years, marked by a cultural renaissance, the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, and an England that emerged as a global power. But it was hardly the smooth, destined path that myths would have you believe. Elizabeth's rise to power was a testament to her resilience in the face of near-constant adversity. She turned the Tudor court's political chaos into her own stage, where she was the leading lady in a drama that shaped the future of England. And thus, Elizabeth I became more than just a monarch. She became a legend, a woman who defied the odds stacked against her from the very start. Her story reminds us that history's heroes are often those who manage to keep their heads, both literally and figuratively, when all around them are losing theirs. Elizabeth's navigation through the choppy waters of royal politics was more akin to a chess grandmaster than a fairy-tale princess. She took the throne on November 17, 1558, and immediately faced a kingdom that was as financially stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. England's coffers were emptier than a pub at closing time, yet Elizabeth had grand plans to transform her nation into a formidable European power. Part of her strategy, a little performance art with her persona as the Virgin Queen. Now, let's unpack this. The term itself could conjure images of chastity and piety, but for Elizabeth, it was all about political leverage. Staying single wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a masterclass in maintaining control. With no husband to share or wrest away her power, Elizabeth was free to rule with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Her pseudo bingo was a spectacle worthy of its own reality show. Eligible bachelors across Europe queued up like it was the hardest nightclub in town. There was Robert Dudley, her childhood friend, and possibly more, whose charm was as potent as his political ambitions. Then came King Philip Roman II of Spain, who must have thought, why not try for another English queen? After his marriage to Elizabeth's sister Mary. But Elizabeth was no damsel waiting to be rescued. She was the puppet master, pulling the strings of diplomacy with a wink and a nod. Her refusal to marry was less about romance and more about realpolitik. A husband might have meant an alliance, sure, but it also meant relinquishing control. Elizabeth's contemporaries scratched their heads, wondering why she didn't just settle down. But Elizabeth knew that a queen with a king consort was often overshadowed, and she had no intention of playing second fiddle in her own kingdom. Meanwhile, back in England, Elizabeth was rolling up her sleeves and getting to work on the economy. The nation was in debt to the tune of £227,000, a sum that could have bought you a small army or a really nice royal wedding. But Elizabeth was determined to turn this financial ship around. With Sir William Cecil, her chief advisor, she implemented a series of economic reforms that would make any CEO proud. First, she revamped the currency, which had been debased under her predecessors. Think of it like hitting reset on a corrupted video game save file. By restoring the coinage to its proper weight and silver content, Elizabeth regained trust in England's economy. It was a savvy move that stabilized inflation and laid the groundwork for future prosperity. And then there was the matter of trade. Elizabeth was determined to boost England's commercial power, and she did so by endorsing the expansion of the merchant adventurers and granting charters to trading companies. The result? England's merchants began to stretch their sea legs, exploring new markets and bringing wealth back home. The East India Company, founded in 1600, was just one of the fruits of this economic renaissance, growing to become a global titan in trade. Elizabeth also had her eye on England's defence. She knew that a nation's security couldn't be left to chance, or to the whims of foreign powers. With an eye on the Spanish threat, she poured resources into building up the navy, transforming it into a force capable of taking on the mightiest armadas. This wasn't just about national pride. It was about ensuring that England could hold its own on the world stage. Of course, all this financial wizardry didn't happen in a vacuum. Elizabeth's policies were supported by a cadre of capable advisers who helped her navigate the treacherous waters of Tudor politics. Figures like Sir Francis Walsingham, her spymaster, kept her informed of plots and conspiracies that could have derailed her reign. Meanwhile, men like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake expanded England's horizons, literally, by exploring new lands and claiming them in the name of the Queen. Elizabeth's economic and diplomatic strategies were as entwined as two lovers in a Shakespearean sonnet. She used her marital status, or lack thereof, as a bargaining chip, dangling the prospect of an alliance before foreign princes like a carrot on a stick, all the while securing England's interests first and foremost. It was a delicate dance of power, one that demanded all of Elizabeth's considerable charm and intellect. However, her reign wasn't all sunshine and roses. The Queen faced numerous challenges, from religious divisions to political intrigue. The pressures of ruling a kingdom were immense, and the expectations placed upon Elizabeth were as heavy as the crown she wore. But she bore it all with a sense of duty and an unyielding determination to secure her legacy. So, what's the takeaway here? Elizabeth I wasn't just a monarch. She was a shrewd strategist, a savvy economist, and a master of public image. Her virgin queen persona may have been a myth in the making, but it was also a brilliant piece of political theatre. Elizabeth understood the power of narrative and used it to craft a reign that would be remembered for centuries. And while myths like to paint her as an untouchable icon, the reality was far more complex. Elizabeth was human, with all the flaws and brilliance that entails. Her reign was a high-wire act, and she walked it with the precision of a seasoned acrobat. The stakes were high, and the risks were many, but Elizabeth knew that the greatest reward was a nation transformed under her rule. Stay tuned, because the saga of Elizabeth I continues. Her reign had many more twists and turns, from the threat of invasion to cultural upheaval, and her story is far from over. As the saga of Elizabeth I continues, we dive into her handling of internal conflicts and rebellions, a realm where her political acumen truly shone. Now, let's talk about the Northern Rebellion of 1569, which was about as welcome as a rainstorm at a summer picnic. Picture this. A bunch of disgruntled Catholic nobles up north got it into their heads that Elizabeth's Protestant policies were a bit too much like kale, hard to swallow. Led by the Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland, they aimed to replace Elizabeth with her Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Think of it as medieval Game of Thrones, with less CGI and more real-world consequences. The rebellion was a messy affair, involving skirmishes, sieges, and a fair amount of panic from the Elizabethan government. Elizabeth, however, wasn't about to let a few noble upstarts ruin her reign. Her response was swift and decisive. She dispatched a formidable army under the Earl of Sussex, who had zero interest in negotiating with traitors. By early 1570, the rebellion was crushed like a poorly baked soufflé, and the aftermath was brutal. Around 800 rebels met the business end of a noose, proving that Elizabeth wasn't playing around when it came to keeping her kingdom united. But let's not get too comfortable, because across the Irish Sea, things were even more complex. The Irish question was like a thorny puzzle with pieces that just wouldn't fit. Elizabeth's rule in Ireland was marked by a series of rebellions that made the Northern Rebellion look like a minor squabble. The problem was that Ireland was a Catholic stronghold, and Elizabeth's attempts to enforce English laws and Protestantism were about as popular as a flu outbreak. The most significant of these was the Desmond rebellions, which stretched from 1569 to 1583. The first rebellion fizzled out, but the second, led by the Earl of Desmond, turned into a full-blown conflict. Elizabeth's forces employed scorched earth tactics, leaving parts of Munster looking like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The cost was staggering, thousands of lives lost, and a landscape devastated. Yet despite the harsh measures, Elizabeth's grip on Ireland remained tenuous at best, a reminder that some thorns are not easily plucked. Meanwhile, back in England, Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, was orchestrating a surveillance network that would make modern intelligence agencies salivate. Walsingham's network of informers, double agents, and codebreakers was the Tudor equivalent of a security blanket. With plots against Elizabeth as common as bad weather, Walsingham's spies ensured that the Queen could sleep a little easier at night. One of the most famous plots that Walsingham uncovered was the Babington plot of 1586. This convoluted scheme involved a group of Catholic conspirators, led by Anthony Babington, who planned to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. Walsingham's operatives intercepted secret letters, exposing the plot and sealing Mary's fate. Elizabeth, with a heavy heart and a pragmatic mind, signed Mary's death warrant. Mary's execution in 1587 was a dramatic and controversial climax to a saga of intrigue that had gripped the kingdom. Now, let's not forget the religious tug-of-war that had been brewing since Elizabeth donned the crown. Elizabeth's Protestant England was a thorn in the side of Catholic Europe. In 1570, Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth, declaring her a heretic and releasing her subjects from allegiance to her, a papal mic drop if ever there was one. This decree was like throwing petrol on a fire, encouraging Catholic plots against Elizabeth and straining her relations with Catholic monarchs. Elizabeth's religious policies were a balancing act. She aimed to establish a middle ground with her Elizabethan religious settlement in 1559, which was part Catholic in form but Protestant in doctrine. Yet this compromise pleased neither extreme. Catholics saw her as a heretic usurper, while hardline Protestants thought she wasn't Protestant enough. It was like trying to host a dinner party where both vegans and carnivores felt satisfied, a near impossible task. Amidst all this, Elizabeth maintained her trademark poise. She was a master of political theatre, using her image as the Virgin Queen to symbolize purity and continuity in a fractious era. Her unmarried status was both a shield and a sword, protecting her from foreign alliances that could undermine her authority while allowing her to wield power unchallenged within her own court. Elizabeth I, faced with rebellions, religious strife, and the constant threat of assassination, proved herself a monarch of resilience and intellect. Her reign was a testament to the power of strategic thinking and the art of turning adversity into opportunity. As we leave her story on the brink of more challenges, remember that the Virgin Queen's legacy was built not on myth, but on the gritty reality of leadership in a world as turbulent as the seas around her island nation. Stay tuned, because the drama of Elizabeth's reign is far from over, and there are more twists and turns to explore as we continue this historical journey. Yet as the storm clouds of rebellion and intrigue continue to swirl around Elizabeth I, she turned her gaze outward, eyeing the European chessboard with a mix of caution and ambition. Enter the Spanish Armada. Now, if you're expecting a tale of England's plucky underdog triumphing over a hulking Spanish Goliath, hold your horses. The reality was a bit more complicated and a lot messier. Let's rewind to the mid-1580. Philip Roman II of Spain, who was about as fond of Elizabeth as a cat is of a vacuum cleaner, had a bone to pick. Philip's grudge list was long. Elizabeth had snubbed his marriage proposal, supported Dutch rebels against him, and authorized English privateers, read, government-sanctioned pirates, to harass Spanish ships. This was not a man you wanted on your bad side, unless you fancied a continental squabble. By 1588, Philip decided it was time to teach England a lesson. Enter the Spanish Armada, a fleet of 130 ships, armed to the teeth and ready to rumble. But here's where it gets juicy. The Armada wasn't just a military mission, it was a floating propaganda machine. Philip aimed to restore Catholicism in England, and what better way to do it than with a divine wind at his back? Meanwhile, Elizabeth and her advisers were prepping like it was the Tudor equivalent of DEFCON 1. England's navy, though scrappy, was relatively small, but they had a secret weapon, Sir Francis Drake, the kind of guy who'd beat you at chess while simultaneously sinking your fleet. Drake and his fellow seamen had been busy innovating, creating faster, more maneuverable ships that could outdance the Spanish galleons like a Tudor era dancing with the stars. The Armada set sail in May, and by July it was creeping up the English Channel. Cue dramatic music. The English Navy engaged in a series of skirmishes, employing hit-and-run tactics that would make any guerrilla fighter proud. But here's the kicker. Bad weather played as much a role in the outcome as English naval might. The Protestant wind, as it was later dubbed, scattered the Spanish fleet like leaves in a gale. Let's bust a myth here. The English victory was less about divine favor and more about sheer luck and tactical innovation. Sure, the English had pluck and skill, but Mother Nature was the real MVP, sending storms that drove the Spanish ships off course, some wrecking along the rocky coasts of Scotland and Ireland. Of the original 130 ships, barely half limped back to Spain. Philip's grand plan had more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. And then there was Elizabeth's legendary Tilbury speech. You know the one, where she claimed to have the heart and stomach of a king. Delivered to her troops as the Armada threatened, it was a masterclass in PR. Picture it. The Queen clad in armor, rallying her forces with the kind of flair that could put any motivational speaker to shame. It was a political theater of the highest caliber, and it worked. Elizabeth's words were crafted to galvanize her people and cement her image as the indomitable Virgin Queen. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The reality was that England's victory didn't instantly catapult it to global dominance. The country was still a second-rate power compared to Spain and France. But what the Armada's defeat did accomplish was to secure Elizabeth's reign and bolster national pride. It was a morale boost wrapped in a patriotic narrative that would echo through the ages, shaping England's self-image long after the last Spanish ship had sunk. The aftermath of the Armada also turned the spotlight on England's naval prowess. Elizabeth and her advisers knew that a strong navy was crucial not just for defense, but for expanding England's influence. The defeat of the Armada marked the beginning of England's rise as a maritime power, setting the stage for future explorations and colonial ventures that would redefine the globe. But don't worry, we're saving that saga for another day. And while Elizabeth basked in the glow of victory, she didn't let it go to her head much. She was acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. The Catholic threat was far from over, and the political landscape of Europe was as volatile as a Shakespearean plot twist. Elizabeth continued to navigate these treacherous waters with the deftness of a seasoned sailor, knowing that her reign and her legacy were forever tied to the tides of fortune and the winds of change. So, what's the verdict on Elizabeth's foreign policy and the Armada? It was a heady mix of strategic brilliance, opportunistic gambles, and a healthy dose of luck. Elizabeth was a leader who knew how to play the long game, leveraging every advantage and adapting to every challenge. Her reign was a testament to the power of resilience and the ability to transform adversity into opportunity. And yet, the story of Elizabeth I is far from over. As we sail into the final chapter of her reign, more challenges await on the horizon. There's no room for complacency in the Tudor court, and Elizabeth will need all her wits and charm to see her through. So, buckle up, because the ride is about to get even more interesting. Stay tuned as we explore the final leg of Elizabeth's remarkable journey, a tale of power, politics, and the indelible mark she left on history. As the final curtain drew closer on Elizabeth I's reign, she faced the sobering reality that no amount of political prowess or naval triumphs could stave off the inevitable march of time. By the late 1590, the Virgin Queen was entering her twilight years, a period filled with both reflection and continued drama. Elizabeth, ever the consummate performer, understood that her legacy was as much about image as it was about policy. And oh, what an image it was! Her public persona had been meticulously crafted over decades, a mix of regal splendor and approachable charisma that proved to be her most enduring achievement. Let's talk about the myth of the Golden Age, a phrase that conjures images of prosperity, peace, and cultural flourishing under Elizabeth's rule. Now, while it's true that England flourished in many ways during her reign, with the likes of Shakespeare and Marlowe lighting up the stage, the reality was a bit more nuanced. The economy was like a seesaw, with periods of boom followed by busts that could make the stock market look stable. Inflation was a persistent bugbear, spurred on by debased currency and fluctuating grain prices, which meant that even as England's wealth grew, so did the cost of living. Moreover, Elizabeth's government, for all its successes, faced the same budgetary headaches that have plagued rulers since time immemorial. The Spanish Armada might have been vanquished, but maintaining a formidable navy, or any military force, for that matter, was an expensive affair. The defeat of the Armada cost England a pretty penny, and they were still recovering from that financial hangover years later. The Crown had to juggle loans and taxes like a circus performer, always one misstep away from economic disaster. But what about succession, you ask? Therein lay one of Elizabeth's greatest challenges, a dilemma that haunted her years like a ghost at a feast. With no direct heir, owing to her strategic decision to remain unmarried, Elizabeth's council was ever anxious about the future. It was like a game of musical thrones, where the music could stop at any moment, leaving England vulnerable to civil unrest or foreign meddling. Enter James VI of Scotland, a Protestant with a solid claim thanks to his great-grandmother, Margaret Tudor, Henry Roman VIII's sister. Elizabeth, ever the shrewd politician, gradually warmed to the idea of James as her successor, a move that would unite the crowns of England and Scotland upon her death. And speaking of death, Elizabeth's later years were marked by a series of personal losses that would test even the most stoic of monarchs. The passing of her closest advisers and friends, like Sir William Cecil in 1598 and the Earl of Essex in 1601, the latter after a failed rebellion against her, left Elizabeth increasingly isolated. Essex's rebellion, a botched attempt at seizing power that ended with his execution, was a particularly bitter pill. It was a reminder that even in her old age, the spectre of betrayal was never far from her door. Yet through all this, Elizabeth maintained her grip on the throne with tenacity and a touch of theatrical flair. She was a monarch who understood the power of spectacle, often making grand public appearances draped in jewels and finery that spoke volumes about her enduring authority. These events were as much about statecraft as they were about fashion. They reinforced her image as a ruler who was both accessible and untouchable, a living embodiment of the majesty of England. Now, let's not forget the lessons that modern leaders could glean from Elizabeth's reign. Her skillful manipulation of her image, for starters, is a masterclass in branding that would make any PR guru swoon. Elizabeth knew that perception was often as important as reality, and she wielded this knowledge like a weapon, crafting a narrative of strength and stability that outlasted her lifetime. She also understood the art of compromise, a necessary skill in a world where religious and political tensions simmered like a pot about to boil over. Her Elizabethan religious settlement was a testament to her ability to balance competing interests, a lesson in finding common ground that remains relevant today. And let's not forget her economic acumen. Elizabeth's focus on trade and fiscal responsibility laid the groundwork for England's future prosperity, setting the stage for the global empire that her successors would inherit. Her reign was a reminder that economic stability is the bedrock upon which great nations are built, a truth that echoes through the corridors of history. But perhaps the most poignant lesson of Elizabeth's reign is the power of resilience. Here was a woman who defied the odds from the very start, navigating a patriarchal world with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Her ability to adapt, to turn adversity into opportunity, and to remain steadfast in the face of overwhelming challenges is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. As Elizabeth approached the end of her life, she knew that her legacy was secure. She had transformed England into a formidable power, a nation capable of holding its own on the world stage. And while the myth of the Golden Age might have glossed over the rough edges, the reality of her reign was one of triumph over adversity, a tale of a queen who refused to be defined by her circumstances. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I passed away, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for centuries. Her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era under James I. Yet, even in death, Elizabeth's spirit lingered, a symbol of a nation that had come of age under her rule. So, as we bid farewell to the Virgin Queen, let us remember her not just as a mythic figure, but as a flesh-and-blood monarch who navigated one of the most tumultuous periods in English history with grace, wit, and an unyielding sense of purpose. Her story is a reminder that history's greatest leaders are not those who are born into power, but those who rise to meet the challenges of their time with courage and determination. And there you have it, dear listeners, the saga of Elizabeth I, a tale of power, politics, and the indelible mark she left on the pages of history. As we close this chapter, let us carry forward the lessons of her reign, for they remain as relevant today as they were in the tumultuous days of the Tudor court. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the truth that lie beneath the surface of history. In the swirling dust storms of first-century Central Asia, a tribe known as the Kushans was about to take the stage with a flair that would have made even the most seasoned showman envious. Here they were, a group that came armed not just with a formidable collection of horses, but a knack for empire building that could rival the best. Now, don't let the exotic name or the grand ambitions fool you into thinking they were some magical people emerging out of a fairy tale. No genie lamps or magic carpets here. The Kushans were real, gritty, and ready to roll. Their story begins with the Yuezhi, a confederation of tribes that had a taste for adventure and a flair for migration that would make even the most seasoned nomads blush. We're talking about a group that got nudged out of their original homes by the Xiongnu, a bunch you might know better as the Huns' terrifying predecessors. Around 176 BCE, the Yuezhi decided they had enough of this nonsense and embarked on a move that would put any modern-day relocation to shame. After all, it's not easy packing up your entire life and moving across the Eurasian steppes, especially without a GPS to guide you. Their journey southward was less of a leisurely stroll and more of an epic saga, involving a dramatic shift from the Tarim Basin to the fertile lands of Bactria, which is modern-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. They weren't just wandering aimlessly, though. The Yuezhi had their eyes on greener pastures, and Bactria, with its lush landscapes and strategic position along the Silk Road, fit the bill perfectly. Think of it as the Beverly Hills of the ancient world, where the rich and powerful want to set up shop. By 135 BCE, the Yuezhi had made Bactria their own, but it wasn't until around 30 CE that the Kushans, one of the Yuezhi tribes, decided to take the reins. Under the leadership of Kujula Kadphises, the Kushans consolidated power, and the empire began to take shape. Kujula was not your average tribal leader. He had vision. He understood the value of a good location and knew that controlling the crossroads of the Silk Road was like owning prime real estate in New York City. Control trade routes, and you control wealth. Speaking of the Silk Road, this wasn't just some dusty trail with a few wandering merchants. It was the highway of the ancient world, stretching over 4,000 miles and connecting China with the Mediterranean. This was the place where silk, spices, and stories were exchanged. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Silk Road was also a magnet for bandits and misfortune. Imagine a caravan trotting along, laden with valuable goods, only to be waylaid by a gang of opportunistic raiders. Not exactly the stuff of bedtime stories, unless you like your tales with a side of peril. The economic allure of the Silk Road was undeniable. The Kushans, with their control over the key sections of this trade highway, amassed wealth that would make even the richest Roman aristocrats green with envy. Silk from China, spices from India, and luxury goods from the Mediterranean flowed through their territories. This was an empire that understood the art of taxation and trade better than most modern governments. And they didn't just sit on their wealth. They spent it on building cities, fostering art, and perhaps most importantly, maintaining an army that could defend all that shiny stuff. But before you start imagining the Kushans as some sort of ancient Wall Street moguls, let's ground this in reality. Building an empire in Central Asia wasn't just about hoarding riches. It was about navigating a complex political landscape filled with rival tribes, shifting alliances, and the ever-present threat of invasion. The Kushans had to be as politically savvy as they were militarily capable. They forged alliances with neighboring powers, played diplomatic chess with the Parthians and Romans, and even dabbled in a bit of cultural exchange, adopting and spreading Buddhism along their routes. So there you have it, the Kushans, emerging from the murky mists of history with big dreams and even bigger ambitions. They weren't just a footnote in the annals of time. They were a force to be reckoned with, leaving a legacy that would reverberate through centuries. As we delve deeper into their saga, remember that while their story is full of intrigue and adventure, it's also a testament to the harsh realities of empire building in a world where the only constant was change. And in the wild, unpredictable theater of ancient Central Asia, the Kushans were nothing short of master performers. With the Kushans making their mark, let's zoom in on the man at the helm, Kujula Kadphises. Now, Kujula wasn't just any tribal chieftain with delusions of grandeur. Oh no, this guy had a game plan that would have made any modern CEO green with envy. We're talking about a leader who knew that to be a big player on the world stage, you needed more than just brute force. You needed political finesse, economic savvy, and a touch of marketing genius. Kujula Kadphises understood the power of branding before it was even a thing. He took a page straight out of the Roman playbook and started minting coins with his own likeness. Imagine that. Back when most folks barely knew what their neighbor looked like, Kujula was putting his face on the equivalent of ancient billboards. Numismatic propaganda. Folks, a fancy term for what we'd call savvy self-promotion today. These coins weren't just currency, they were political statements, a testament to his authority and vision. And let's not forget the alliances. Kujula was no isolationist. He didn't just sit back and let the world come to him. He went out and shook hands, metaphorically speaking. His reign saw the Kushan Empire expanding its borders, not just through conquest, but through clever alliances. He forged ties with the Parthians and even the remnants of the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms. This was diplomacy with a capital D, folks. It's like Kujula had a Rolodex full of powerful contacts, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Expansion wasn't just about gobbling up territories like some ancient Pac-Man. It was about embracing and integrating diverse cultures. Kujula was the maestro of cultural fusion, blending Greek and Indian elements into the burgeoning Kushan state. This wasn't cultural appropriation, it was cultural appreciation and integration. The Kushans adopted the Greek language for their administration and embraced Indian religious concepts, including Buddhism, which they spread like wildfire along the Silk Road. Talk about being ahead of your time. This was cosmopolitanism before it had a name, a melting pot of cultures that made the Kushan Empire a vibrant hub of trade and ideas. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. The romantic notion of a harmonious cultural blend often overlooks the gritty reality of maintaining such a vast and diverse empire. It required constant vigilance, smart governance, and yes, a strong military presence. Kujula knew that without an army to back up his policies, his empire would crumble like a house of cards. And so, while he was busy minting coins and forging alliances, he also ensured that his military was ready to defend his interests at a moment's notice. Now, the economics of empire building can't be ignored. Control over the Silk Road brought immense wealth, but managing that wealth was a whole different ballgame. The Kushans smartly invested in infrastructure, roads, rest stops, and fortifications that would make a Roman engineer nod in approval. They understood the art of taxation, ensuring that merchants and traders contributed to the empire's coffers. This wasn't just about hoarding riches. It was about creating a sustainable economic engine that could power the empire for generations. And speaking of sustainability, let's talk about governance. The Kushans were no strangers to the art of statecraft. They established a centralized administration that was surprisingly sophisticated for its time. Think of it as an ancient bureaucracy that kept the empire running smoothly, from tax collection to law enforcement. This was no small feat, given the vast and varied territories under Kushan control. It was a system that allowed for local autonomy while maintaining overarching imperial authority, a balancing act that many modern governments still struggle with. Kujula Kadphises was a visionary, but he wasn't without his challenges. Expanding an empire wasn't just about conquest and culture. It also involved dealing with internal dissent and external threats. Rival tribes and neighboring powers watched the rise of the Kushans with wary eyes, ready to pounce at any sign of weakness. Kujula's reign was marked by a constant juggling act, maintaining stability within while warding off threats from without. In the end, Kujula Kadphises was more than just a name in the annals of history. He was a leader who saw the potential of what his empire could be and wasn't afraid to take bold steps to realize that vision. His reign set the stage for the Kushan Empire's golden age, a time when it would become one of the most influential powers in the region. But that's a story for another day, as we delve deeper into the legacy of the Kushans and the impact they left on the world stage. For now, let's tip our hats to Kujula Kadphises, a king who understood that empire building was as much about strategy and innovation as it was about power and conquest. As Kujula Kadphises paved the way for the Kushan Empire's golden era, enter stage right, Kanishka the Great, the empire's rockstar emperor. If Kujula was the architect, Kanishka was the showman who took the blueprint and turned it into a reality that dazzled the ancient world. Picture a ruler whose charisma could rival the greatest pop icons of today, with a penchant for expansion that would make even the most aggressive CEOs look tame. Kanishka didn't just sit on his throne, twiddling his thumbs. No, he had a grand vision to elevate the Kushan Empire to new heights, figuratively and literally. And what better way to do that than with a military campaign that would make Alexander the Great nod in approval? Kanishka's ambitions took him across the Indian subcontinent and beyond, with his empire stretching from the steppes of Central Asia all the way to the Ganges River. At the height of his power, around 127 to 150 CE, his empire was a sprawling behemoth that covered nearly 1.5 million square kilometers. That's almost the size of modern-day Mongolia and France combined. Quite the empire for someone who likely never heard of a map projection. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Kanishka's military prowess. While legends would have you believe he was invincible, the truth is a bit more nuanced. Sure, he was a formidable conqueror, but let's not pretend he didn't face his fair share of setbacks. The romanticized image of an emperor who never lost a battle is as believable as a diet without carbs. Sounds great on paper, but reality begs to differ. Kanishka did face defeats, most notably in his campaigns against China, where he encountered stiff resistance from the Han dynasty. The Chinese, not ones to roll over easily, pushed back with a vigor that clipped Kanishka's wings, reminding him that even rock stars hit a sour note now and then. Despite these hiccups, Kanishka's legacy is more than just his military exploits. He was a cultural innovator, a patron of the arts and religion, who embraced the melting pot of cultures within his empire with open arms. Under his reign, the Kushan Empire became a vibrant hub of artistic and religious activity, a cosmopolitan center where Greek, Indian, Persian, and Central Asian influences melded into something uniquely Kushan. This wasn't just cultural assimilation. It was a bold experiment in fusion that left a lasting mark on the region. Kanishka's religious inclinations are where things get really interesting. He's remembered as one of the great patrons of Buddhism, a move that might seem a bit unexpected for a warrior king. But Kanishka wasn't just about swords and soldiers. He was also about spiritual exploration. He sponsored the Fourth Buddhist Council in Kashmir, an event that helped shape Mahayana Buddhism, a branch that would spread across Asia like wildfire. Talk about a legacy. Kanishka didn't just build an empire. He helped lay the foundations for a religious movement that would influence billions. And then there's the Kanishka Stupa, a colossal testament to his reign and religious devotion. Picture this, a 400-foot monument towering over the landscape, a declaration in brick and stone that shouted, "I'm here to stay." It was one of the tallest structures of its time, a feat of engineering that would have made any Roman architect green with envy. The stupa wasn't just an architectural wonder. It was a statement of intent, a symbol of Kanishka's desire to leave an indelible mark on history. Sadly, today, only ruins remain, a poignant reminder of the impermanence of even the grandest human endeavors. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the past. The romantic image of Kanishka as a benevolent ruler and spiritual patron glosses over the gritty realities of his reign. Running an empire the size of the Kushans wasn't all art and religion. It was also about hard-nosed governance and military logistics. Kanishka had to be as savvy a politician as he was a general, navigating a complex web of alliances and rivalries that could topple his empire if he made one wrong move. And let's not forget the economic muscle needed to sustain such a vast realm. The Kushans had to juggle tax revenues, trade tariffs, and military expenses, all while ensuring that the Silk Road kept humming along as a vital artery of commerce. The myth of Kanishka's invincibility also neatly sidesteps the reality of holding onto power. Ruling over diverse peoples with different languages, religions, and customs required more than just brute force. It demanded a sophisticated understanding of governance and diplomacy. Kanishka's administration had to be flexible yet firm, allowing local autonomy while maintaining the central authority needed to keep the empire from fracturing like a poorly baked pie crust. So, while Kanishka the Great might sound like a character straight out of an epic, it's essential to remember the real man behind the myth. He was a ruler who, despite his flaws and failures, left an indelible legacy that shaped not just the Kushan Empire, but the cultural and religious landscape of Asia. As we continue to explore the Kushan's fascinating saga, let's keep in mind that history, much like Kanishka's empire, is a complex tapestry woven from both triumphs and setbacks. And with more adventures to uncover in the saga of the Kushan Empire, there's plenty to keep us on the edge of our seats. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. As we continue to unravel the saga of the Kushan Empire, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of their strategic diplomacy and trade policies, the real nuts and bolts that transformed Central Asia into a bustling hub of commerce and culture. Remember, this wasn't just about creating an ancient utopia. It was about savvy economic strategies that would make Wall Street titans nod in approval. So, how exactly did the Kushans turn their empire into the ancient world's version of Times Square? Well, for starters, had a strategic position right smack in the middle of the Silk Road, an ancient superhighway that made all of this possible. We're talking about a trade network that extended over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, passing through some of the most treacherous terrains known to man. The Kushans didn't just sit back and let the trade winds blow their way. They actively shaped the flow of commerce with policies that were as shrewd as they were savvy. First up, let's talk about diplomacy. The Kushans were the ultimate deal-makers, forging alliances like seasoned diplomats. They didn't just rely on military might. They knew that a well-timed handshake could be just as powerful as a well-aimed arrow. They formed alliances with the Parthians to their west and the Han dynasty to their east, turning potential enemies into trading partners. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about creating a network of trust that lubricated the wheels of commerce. The Kushan court became a crossroads of cultures, where envoys from distant lands gathered to negotiate treaties, exchange gifts, and, of course, trade. This diplomatic finesse wasn't just about playing nice with the neighbors. It was a calculated move to ensure that the trade routes remained open and secure. After all, no merchant wants to risk their life and livelihood navigating a gauntlet of hostile territories. By maintaining good relations with neighboring powers, the Kushans ensured that their stretch of the Silk Road remained a safe and attractive option for traders. Think of it as offering a merchant's guarantee, a promise that their goods would reach their destinations unscathed and untaxed by surprise tolls from marauding bandits or opportunistic local chieftains. Now, let's dive into the trade policies that fueled this economic engine. The Kushans were experts at taxation, but not in the way you'd expect. They understood that to attract merchants far and wide, they needed a tax system that was fair and predictable. Instead of bleeding traders dry with exorbitant levies, the Kushans levied modest tolls that encouraged commerce rather than stifling it. It was a delicate balance, ensuring that the empire's coffers were filled without driving merchants to bypass their territories altogether. And then there was the infrastructure. The Kushans invested in roads, bridges, and caravanserais, ancient inns that offered shelter and security to weary travelers. These weren't just creature comforts. They were strategic investments that made the Kushan territories the preferred route for traders. Imagine a well-maintained highway dotted with rest stops where you could refuel, recharge, and swap stories with fellow travelers. That's the kind of environment the Kushans created, making their empire a beacon for merchants from all corners of the known world. But trade wasn't just about material goods. It was also about the exchange of ideas, technologies, and religions. This brings us to the Kushan's role as a spiritual hotspot. While Kanishka the Great is often celebrated as a patron of Buddhism, the Kushan's embrace of the faith was more than just spiritual enlightenment. It was a savvy economic strategy that boosted trade and stability across their empire. By promoting Buddhism, the Kushans tapped into a network of spiritual travelers, pilgrims who journeyed vast distances to visit holy sites and monasteries. These pilgrims, in turn, became part of the trade ecosystem, bringing with them goods, stories, and cultural practices that enriched the Kushan Empire. Buddhism also served as a unifying force, providing a common thread that connected diverse peoples within the empire. It was a masterstroke of cultural diplomacy, creating a shared identity that transcended ethnic and linguistic boundaries. The Kushans weren't just spreading religion. They were forging a cultural bridge that linked the Indian subcontinent with Central Asia, China, and beyond. This wasn't just about spiritual salvation. It was about creating a cohesive empire that could stand the test of time. And let's not forget the economic benefits of being a spiritual hub. The influx of pilgrims brought with it a steady stream of revenue, as travelers spent money on lodging, food, and offerings. Temples and monasteries became centers of economic activity, attracting artisans, traders, and scholars. It was a virtuous cycle, where spirituality and commerce fed into each other, creating a prosperous and stable society. But let's not romanticize this too much. The idea of a harmonious, spiritually enriched empire glosses over the harsh realities of maintaining such a complex system. The Kushans had to navigate a delicate balance between fostering religious freedom and maintaining control. They had to ensure that the spread of Buddhism didn't lead to unrest among those who followed different faiths. This required a level of tolerance and flexibility that was rare in the ancient world, but essential for the stability of the empire. In the end, the Kushan Empire wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. It was a powerhouse of commerce, culture, and spirituality. Their strategic diplomacy and trade policies transformed Central Asia into a buzzing hub that left a lasting legacy on the world stage. As we continue to explore their story, let's remember that the Kushans were more than just conquerors. They were architects of a vibrant and interconnected world. The drama of their rise and influence is far from over, so stay tuned for more twists and turns in this fascinating saga. And just when the Kushans thought they'd mastered the art of empire building, life threw in a plot twist worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. Picture this: an empire stretching across vast swaths of Central Asia, its coffers brimming with Silk Road riches, only to find itself teetering on the edge of collapse faster than you can say economic downturn. The decline of the Kushan Empire was like a slow-motion car crash, hard to watch, but impossible to look away from. Let's start with the internal dramas that would put any soap opera to shame. The Kushan Empire's vastness was both its strength and its Achilles heel. You see, managing an empire that spanned almost 1.5 million square kilometers isn't as easy as it sounds. It's a bit like trying to keep all the plates spinning at a circus while juggling flaming torches. By the mid-3rd century, the once cohesive empire was beginning to show cracks. Infighting among the ruling elite turned governance into a game of political musical chairs, with power struggles that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones viewer cringe. Then there were the external pressures, because what's a good decline without a few barbarians at the gate? Enter the Sassanids, the new kids on the block in Persia, who were more than eager to take a bite out of the Kushan pie. The Sassanids, under the leadership of Ardashir I, were like the neighborhood bullies who decided the Kushans had been lording it over the Silk Road long enough. The invasions began around 240 CE, and the Kushans, already stretched thin from internal squabbles, found themselves on the defensive. The Sassanids weren't just content with a few border skirmishes. They were here for a full-scale power play. By the time the dust settled, the western parts of the Kushan Empire had been gobbled up faster than you can say territorial conquest. The Sassanids' expansion meant that the once mighty Kushans were now reduced to a shadow of their former glory, struggling to hold onto their eastern territories. It was as if the empire was trying to hold water in a sieve. No matter how hard they tried, it was slipping through their fingers. And let's not forget the Huns. Yes, those infamous horse-riding nomads who seemed to have an insatiable appetite for conquest. The Huns began making their presence felt on the fringes of the Kushan Empire, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already precarious situation. It's like the Kushans were playing a high-stakes game of chess, only to find out their opponent was playing 3D chess with extra dimensions they hadn't even considered. So what happens when an empire starts to crumble? Well, it turns out that even as the political structures fell apart, the cultural and economic legacies of the Kushans endured. The art and architecture they patronized left an indelible mark on the regions they once ruled. Take, for instance, the Gandhara art, a fascinating blend of Greco-Roman and Indian styles that flourished under the Kushans. This artistic fusion, characterized by its intricate sculptures and vivid depictions of Buddha, spread far and wide, influencing artistic traditions across Asia. The Kushans might have lost their empire, but their cultural influence lingered like a catchy tune you can't get out of your head. And then there's the matter of trade. Though the Kushan Empire itself was on the ropes, the trade routes they once controlled continued to hum with activity. The Silk Road didn't just vanish overnight. It remained a vital artery of commerce long after the Kushans had faded into the background. Their savvy investments in infrastructure and commerce left a legacy that more enduring than the empire itself. Even the Sassanids, who had been so keen to carve up the Kushan territories, recognized the value of these trade networks and sought to capitalize on them. But wait, there's more. The spiritual legacy of the Kushans also stood the test of time. By promoting Buddhism and building monumental stupas and monasteries, they had planted the seeds of a religious movement that would flourish across Asia. Long after the last Kushan king had been dethroned, Buddhist monks continued their pilgrimages along the routes the Kushans had championed, spreading teachings and philosophies that would resonate for centuries. So what do we take away from this saga of rise and fall? The Kushans might not have the name recognition of the Romans or the Greeks, but their impact on the ancient world was profound. They were the weavers of a cultural and economic tapestry that connected East and West long before globalization was a buzzword. In their heyday, they were the embodiment of what it meant to be a cosmopolitan empire, embracing diversity and fostering innovation in ways that still resonate today. And here's the kicker. The Kushans, for all their historical anonymity, managed to shape the world in ways that continue to echo through time. Their story is a reminder that even the mightiest empires are ultimately fragile, subject to the whims of fate and the sands of time. But it's also a testament to the enduring power of ideas and innovations that outlive the empires that birthed them. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through the annals of Kushan history, let's tip our hats to an empire that, despite its eventual decline, left a legacy as rich and complex as the Silk Road itself. Because history isn't just about empires rising and falling. It's about the stories, ideas, and innovations that persist long after the dust has settled. And in that regard, the Kushans were nothing short of extraordinary. In the heart of Southeast Asia, where the jungles hum with life and the air is as thick as a good mystery, the Khmer Empire once carved an architectural symphony out of stone. It's the kind of place that makes you wonder if ancient civil engineers had a secret stash of coffee because they were clearly on another level. Angkor Wat, the crown jewel of this empire, is not just a temple, it's a statement piece that says, "We were here, and we were awesome." Now, back in the 12th century, when Europe was busy with its awkward feudal phase, the Khmer Empire was at its zenith, flexing its architectural muscles. This empire, stretching across modern-day Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, was a bustling hub of innovation and audacity. Angkor Wat is perhaps its most audacious feat, a sprawling temple complex covering 162.6 hectares with a central quincunx of towers that appear to defy both gravity and time. Built under the reign of King Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat was originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu. This was no casual weekend project. The construction took about 30 years, which is roughly the time it takes to get through your Netflix watch list. And while today it stands as a monument to Khmer ingenuity, let's not sugarcoat it. Building this behemoth was a Herculean task. With over 5 million tons of sandstone quarried from Mount Kulin, some 50 kilometers away, it's like they decided to play a game of how far can we move a mountain. The labor force behind this marvel was no small crowd. We're talking about thousands of skilled artisans, masons, and laborers, whose precision work ensured that the bas-reliefs and carvings were as intricate as a Renaissance painting. But let's not forget the unsung heroes of the operation, the elephants. These massive creatures were the ancient cranes and forklifts, hauling enormous sandstone blocks through the dense Cambodian jungle. So the next time you see an elephant, remember, it might have architectural ancestors. Angkor Wat wasn't just about size, it was about sophistication. The temple's orientation is astronomically aligned, with the central tower representing Mount Meru, the center of the universe in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The layout follows a grid pattern that mirrors the cosmos itself, a move that would make even Pythagoras nod in approval. And if that wasn't enough, the entire structure is surrounded by a moat, which isn't just for show. This moat, stretching 5 kilometers, served as a critical water management system, demonstrating the Khmer's advanced understanding of hydraulics. It's like they built a swimming pool to keep their temple cool, because why not? This empire wasn't just an architectural powerhouse, it was a social and economic engine. At its peak, the city of Angkor was home to perhaps 1 million people, thriving in an urban landscape supported by an extensive network of canals, rice paddies, and reservoirs. This was a society that knew how to make the most of their monsoon season, turning potential flooding into a reliable agricultural calendar. In essence, the Khmer had cracked the code of sustainable living long before it was trendy. But let's not get too romantic about it. The Khmer Empire, like all great empires, had its shadows. The myth of an empire built solely on enlightened principles is as much a fantasy as a dragon in a moat. Power struggles, territorial expansion, and heavy taxation were also part of the narrative. Suryavarman II didn't just wake up one day and decide to build Angkor Wat out of pure spiritual devotion. It was also a colossal display of power, designed to legitimize his reign and cement his legacy. The empire was as much about politics and power as it was about art and architecture. So, when we look at Angkor Wat today, we see more than just a temple. We see a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, a complex interplay of spirituality, politics, and sheer audacity. It's a story of an empire that dreamed big and built even bigger, leaving a mark on history that still draws millions of visitors each year. As you wander through its galleries, with the sun casting shadows on the ancient stones, you're walking through layers of history where the echoes of the past whisper stories of a civilization that once thrived in the heart of the jungle. But of course, the romantic allure of Angkor Wat's grandeur didn't just spring from lush artistry and spiritual ambition. It was also fueled by a robust economic engine chugging along like a well-oiled machine. Well, if they'd had machines back then. The Khmer Empire's true secret weapon wasn't hidden within its towering spires or intricate carvings. It was buried in the fertile soil of its rice paddies. Picture this, an empire built not just on stones, but on grains of rice. The agricultural backbone of the Khmer Empire was as epic as its architectural feats. At the heart of this operation was an extensive irrigation network that would make even today's urban planners drool with envy. The Khmer didn't just plant crops. They orchestrated a symphony of water and land, transforming the unpredictable monsoon rains into a reliable ally. They engineered an elaborate system of canals, dikes, and reservoirs, creating one of the most sophisticated water management systems of the ancient world. This setup was not just about keeping the rice paddies happy. It was about turning the empire into a self-sustaining powerhouse. Now, why all the fuss over rice, you ask? Well, rice was the empire's lifeblood. And we're not talking about your average side dish here. This was the economic staple that fed an entire civilization and fueled its expansion. The Khmer weren't just feeding their own. They were exporting rice to neighboring regions, turning it into a currency of influence and control. It was the white gold of Southeast Asia, and it bankrolled everything from the building of Angkor Wat to the empire's military campaigns. If you thought the price of your morning coffee was steep, imagine the stakes when your empire's economy hinged on a good harvest. But while the rice paddies were the quiet heroes, the labor force was the muscle behind the magic. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of workers who toiled under the blazing Cambodian sun, making modern-day rush hour seem like a day at the beach. Forget your cozy ergonomic office chairs. These folks were working with tools that today would be considered quaint at best and cruel at worst. They were the ones cutting, hauling, and assembling the sandstone blocks that would become Angkor Wat, and their daily grind was no walk in the park. The labor force was a diverse mix, with skilled artisans and craftsmen rubbing shoulders with unskilled laborers and farmers drafted during the off-season. This wasn't just a job. It was a massive, state-sponsored effort that required coordination and resources on an imperial scale. It was the ancient version of an all-hands meeting, with everyone from the king's ministers to the lowliest peasant playing a role. If you've ever been part of a major work project, you can imagine the chaos and the occasional triumph of organizing this monumental task without so much as a spreadsheet in sight. And let's not forget the elephants. They were the heavy lifters, the ancient equivalent of a fleet of forklifts, dragging those hefty sandstone blocks through jungles and over rivers. These majestic creatures were indispensable to the process, and their handlers, the mahouts, were the unsung heroes who guided them with a blend of skill and intuition that would make even the most seasoned animal trainer nod in appreciation. The economic and political machinery of the Khmer Empire was as complex as any modern corporation. Taxes were levied not just in coin, but in labor and produce, a system that ensured the empire's coffers and rice granaries were always full. The ruling elite, including King Suryavarman II, understood that maintaining control over such a vast enterprise required more than just brute force. It required a delicate balance of power, diplomacy, and economic savvy. The construction of Angkor Wat wasn't just a passion project. It was a calculated move to consolidate power and project influence across the region. But let's not get too carried away with admiration. The empire's success was also built on exploitation and control, with heavy taxes and forced labor being the dark underbelly of this grand narrative. The myth of a benevolent, harmonious society is as misleading as a mirage in the desert. The reality was a complex web of power dynamics, where the needs of the many often bowed to the whims of the few. Yet, despite these harsh truths, the allure of Angkor Wat endures, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, even if it was occasionally fueled by less than noble means. So, as we delve deeper into the history of the Khmer Empire, remember that behind every monumental achievement lies a story of human endeavor, sometimes glorious, sometimes gritty. It's a tale of a civilization that dared to dream big and wasn't afraid to get its hands dirty in the process. And as we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, one thing is clear. The legacy of the Khmer Empire is as enduring as the stones of Angkor Wat itself, a reminder that history is never just black and white, but a vibrant tapestry of stories waiting to be uncovered. Speaking of the legacy of the Khmer Empire, let's take a deep dive into what really held Angkor Wat together, both literally and figuratively. Sure, it's easy to get lost in the grandeur and spiritual symbolism, but behind every epic temple lies a tale of construction that would make even modern architects break a sweat. Forget power tools and cranes. The Khmer were working with chisels, manpower, and a healthy dose of ingenuity. Let's start with the sandstone blocks. Imagine moving over 5 million tons of these hefty beauties, each weighing up to 1.5 tons, across 50 kilometers of dense Cambodian jungle. That's the kind of logistics headache that would send even Amazon's delivery system into a tailspin. This feat was achieved primarily through an elaborate system of canals and waterways, where the blocks were floated on rafts, a bit like an ancient version of Yuba, if Yuba were run by elephants and water buffalo. The sandstone itself came from the Phnom Kulen Mountains, a quarry teeming with the kind of rock that could withstand centuries of monsoon rains and still look Instagram-ready. This stone was chosen not just for its durability, but for its aesthetic appeal, its golden hue catching the light just right at sunrise and sunset, when Angkor Wat looks like it's been dipped in gold leaf. Now, transporting these blocks was only half the battle. Once on site, these stones needed to be assembled into something that wouldn't crumble at the first tremor. The Khmer builders had their own version of Lego, only theirs involved no mortar. Yep, you heard right. The entire complex is a testament to dry masonry, where stones are precisely cut to fit together perfectly. It's like a 3D jigsaw puzzle on an epic scale. And if you've ever tried to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions, you'll have a pretty good idea of the challenge. Moving on from the structural, let's not forget the artistry. The walls of Angkor Wat are adorned with bas-reliefs that would make even Michelangelo pause in admiration. These intricate carvings tell epic tales from Hindu mythology, like the churning of the ocean of milk, cosmic tug-of-war that explains the origin of immortality. And no, it has nothing to do with the Derry Isle. The detail in these depictions is astounding, with every muscle, expression, and piece of jewelry meticulously carved into stone. It's like a graphic novel etched in sandstone, and for the Khmer, this was more than just decoration. It was a visual storytelling medium in an age before Netflix. The bas-reliefs served both as spiritual guidance and royal propaganda, showcasing the king's divine mandate to rule and his connection to the gods. But let's not romanticize too much. While these carvings are undeniably beautiful, they were also a serious labor of love, and labor is the operative word here. The artisans who worked on these masterpieces did so under demanding conditions, with the sun beating down and deadlines looming like a boss who's had won too many espressos. The process involved chiseling away at the stone with hand tools, a painstaking task that required skill, precision, and a fair bit of patience, qualities not unlike those needed to survive a family road trip. The Khmer weren't just artists, they were also innovative engineers. Take, for instance, the famous apsaras, or celestial dancers, that grace the temple walls. These figures aren't just there for decoration. They're strategically placed to help with water drainage. The Khmer knew that a little bit of artistry could also serve a practical purpose, ensuring that the heavy monsoon rains didn't erode their masterpiece into a pile of rubble. And let's not forget the colors. Yes, Angkor Wat wasn't always the monochrome wonder we see today. Originally, it was painted in vivid hues, with reds, blues, and golds bringing the carvings to life. This riot of color would have been a feast for the eyes, a visual reminder of the divine realm it sought to emulate. Imagine walking through a kaleidoscope of stone, where each step tells a story of gods, kings, and cosmic battles. It's enough to make anyone feel like they've stepped into a living legend. Of course, none of this artistry came cheap. The Khmer Empire poured resources into Angkor Wat that would make a modern government budget look like spare change. The construction was a colossal financial undertaking, supported by the empire's robust economy and heavy taxation. This was more than just an architectural project. It was a statement of power and prosperity, a way for King Suryavarman II to assert his divine right to rule and to leave a lasting legacy that would echo through the ages. But as we marvel at this ancient wonder, let's not forget the human cost behind its beauty. The labor force, composed of skilled artisans and conscripted workers, toiled for decades to bring this vision to life. It was a monumental task that demanded not just physical strength, but also mental fortitude. Imagine spending your days chiseling away at stone, each tap of the hammer a reminder of the king's grand vision and the price of ambition. In the end, Angkor Wat stands as a testament to human creativity, determination, and yes, a fair bit of stubbornness. It's a reminder that behind every great monument lies a story of triumph and toil, of dreams realized through grit and perseverance. As we wander through its halls, we are not just witnesses to history, but participants in a narrative that continues to inspire and intrigue long after the last stone was laid. So, as we delve deeper into the architectural marvels of the Khmer Empire, remember that these stones are more than just building blocks. They are the echoes of a civilization that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And as we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories these stones have yet to tell, waiting patiently to be uncovered by those willing to listen. As we continue to wander through the stone corridors of Angkor Wat, let's pause to peer through the swirling mists of myth and legend that have enshrouded this architectural behemoth. Because, let's face it, no great monument is complete without a few tall tales to spice up its history. And in the case of Angkor Wat, these stories are as intricate as the temple's own bas-reliefs. First up, there's the persistent legend that Angkor Wat was built by divine intervention or even otherworldly beings. Some say it was the work of the gods, a celestial construction project completed in a single night. Now, while this makes for a great campfire story, the reality is a little less divine and a lot more human. The construction, as we've noted, took about 30 years. Definitely not an overnight affair, unless you're using a cosmic stopwatch. The source of this legend likely stems from the sheer scale and sophistication of the temple, which seemed impossible to the people of later generations. Imagine walking through Angkor Wat centuries after its heyday, surrounded by towering spires and intricate carvings. It would be easy to assume that only gods or aliens could pull off such a feat. But modern archaeology, armed with everything from LiDAR to good old-fashioned elbow grease, has given us a more grounded perspective. We know it was the skill and sweat of thousands of laborers, guided by visionary architects, that brought this wonder to life, not an ancient episode of extreme makeover, Temple Edition. But if the divine origins of Angkor Wat are more fiction than fact, what about the mysterious decline of the Khmer Empire? Was it divine wrath, or simply the result of some pre-modern urban planning missteps? Spoiler alert, it's probably the latter, but let's dive in. One popular myth suggests that the fall of the Khmer Empire was due to a curse or divine punishment. The gods, displeased with the hubris of humans, allegedly withdrew their favor, leading to the empire's decline. While this makes for a juicy narrative, the truth is rooted in more earthly concerns, specifically water management. The Khmer were hydraulic wizards, but even the best systems can falter, especially when faced with changing climate patterns or overuse. Recent studies have shown that shifts in monsoon patterns may have led to both devastating floods and severe droughts. Once reliable water management system, the backbone of Khmer agriculture and urban life, could have become a liability. Think of it as an ancient infrastructural collapse, where the very system that fed and sustained the empire became its Achilles heel. It's like building your dream house on a floodplain. Eventually, nature will have its say. Moreover, the Khmer Empire didn't just crumble overnight. It was a slow unraveling, influenced by a cocktail of factors: internal strife, external invasions, and yes, environmental challenges. The empire's decline was a complex process, not a single cataclysmic event. Imagine a slow-motion car crash where everyone's arguing about who should have been steering even as the wheels come off. Let's not forget the human element in this narrative. As much as we love to blame the gods or the weather, it's often people who engineer their own downfalls. The Khmer rulers, in their quest for expansion and grandeur, may have overstretched their resources and their people. Heavy taxation and forced labor might have fueled discontent among the populace, creating social and political tensions that simmered beneath the surface like a pot about to boil over. And while Angkor Wat stands as a testament to the empire's zenith, it also subtly hints at the seeds of its decline. The very ambition that built it was also a harbinger of challenges to come. It's a classic case of reaching for the stars, but forgetting to water the plants back home. So, while the myth of divine wrath makes for a gripping tale, the reality is that the Khmer Empire's decline was a tangled web of human ambition, environmental shifts, and perhaps a touch of hubris. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to the same pitfalls that have tripped up civilizations for millennia: overreach, environmental changes, and the eternal human struggle to balance ambition with sustainability. Yet, despite the harsh realities behind the myths, there's no denying the storytelling flair that has kept these legends alive. They speak to our love of drama, our need for narrative, and our desire to find meaning in the ruins of the past. After all, who doesn't love a good story, especially one with larger-than-life characters and supernatural elements? The tales of Angkor Wat's divine origins and the empire's mysterious decline are more than just historical footnotes. They are part of the cultural tapestry that continues to captivate our imaginations. They remind us that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. And as we delve deeper into the legacy of the Khmer Empire, these myths, while debunked, still hold a certain allure, a testament to the power of storytelling in keeping the past alive. In the end, Angkor Wat is not just a relic of a bygone era. It is a living monument to human creativity, ambition, and yes, the occasional folly. It stands as a reminder that history is a dance between myth and reality, where the echoes of the past continue to shape our understanding of the present. And as we prepare to explore the next chapter of the Khmer Empire's story, let's keep our eyes and minds open to the myriad tales these ancient stones have to share. And so, the story of Angkor Wat weaves onward, morphing from a tale of ancient grandeur into a modern saga of rediscovery and identity. Fast forward to the 19th century, when the world was knee-deep in the age of exploration, a time when Europeans were gallivanting across the globe, claiming they'd found things that had been sitting there quite contentedly for centuries. Enter Henry Mauhat, a French naturalist who, in the 1860, stumbled upon Angkor Wat in the steamy jungles of Cambodia. To be fair, locals were already living their lives around this stone colossus, so it's not like Mauhat actually discovered anything new. But hey, never let facts get in the way of a good headline, right? Mauhat's writings, filled with breathless awe about this lost city, sparked a wave of interest back in Europe, igniting imaginations with tales of a monumental civilization that seemed plucked straight out of a fairy tale. He described Angkor Wat as a rival to that of Salaman, erected by some ancient Michelangelo. Quite the ringing endorsement, even if a bit hyperbolic. But who can blame him? Imagine stumbling through the jungle and finding a temple complex covering 162.6 hectares, with towers taller than most stories you've heard. This rediscovery helped thrust Angkor Wat into the global spotlight, turning it into a symbol not just of lost grandeur, but of a cultural heritage that needed preservation. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the temple became a focal point in the struggle for Cambodia's national identity. As Cambodia shook off colonial chains and stepped into independence, Angkor Wat was right there, a stone-cold reminder of what the Khmer once achieved and could achieve again. Today, Angkor Wat graces the national flag of Cambodia, making it the only country in the world with a building on its banner. Talk about a mic drop. It's a potent symbol of resilience, beauty, and the enduring spirit of a people who have seen more than their fair share of tumult. The temple stands as a testament to national pride and cultural continuity, a link to a past that informs the present. But what about the modern tourists who flock to Angkor Wat, smartphones in hand, capturing selfies against the backdrop of these ancient stones? In this digital age, Angkor Wat has become something of an influencer itself. It's like the Mona Lisa of temples, enigmatic, immortal, and forever photogenic. With over 2.6 million visitors a year, it's safe to say Angkor Wat is a hit on the travel circuit, proving that even in a world of virtual experiences, there's nothing quite like the real deal. And this brings us, somewhat amusingly, to a question worth pondering. What would those original Khmer architects think of their masterpiece now serving as the backdrop for countless travel selfies? Would they be horrified or secretly delighted that their creation has transcended its original purpose to become a global icon? Perhaps they'd smile wryly, acknowledging the irony that their symbol of divine order and cosmic harmony is now a hotspot for Instagram influencers and spiritual seekers alike. Yet, beneath the hashtags and filters, there lies a deeper truth. Angkor Wat isn't just a tourist attraction. It's a living monument to the power of human creativity and the stories we tell to make sense of our world. It's a reminder that while civilizations rise and fall, their legacies can endure, capturing our imaginations long after the last stone is laid. In a way, Angkor Wat's modern role is a continuation of its original purpose, a place where the divine meets the earthly, where stories are told and retold, each visitor adding their chapter to its ongoing narrative. It remains a place of mystery and wonder, a testament to the ingenuity of those who dared to dream big. As we wrap up this journey through the corridors of time, let's take a moment to appreciate the audacity and ambition of the Khmer architects and builders. They imagined a world where their legacy would outlast their empire, and in doing so, they crafted a masterpiece that continues to inspire awe and wonder. In the end, Angkor Wat is more than just a marvel of ancient engineering. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, a symbol of what we can achieve when we bridge the gap between dream and reality. So whether you're exploring its halls in person or through the lens of history, remember that each stone tells a story of resilience, ambition, and the timeless quest to leave a mark on the world. And as you stand before Angkor Wat, with its majestic towers reaching towards the heavens, know that you are part of a lineage of dreamers and builders, storytellers and seekers, all drawn to this ancient wonder by the same timeless call. It's a legacy that belongs to all of us, reminder that while we may be separated by time and space, our shared history connects us in ways that transcend the boundaries of culture and geography. So, here's to Angkor Wat, an architectural marvel, a symbol of national pride, and a beacon of inspiration in a world that never stops turning. Whether you're a history buff, a curious traveler, or simply someone who appreciates a good story, Angkor Wat has something to offer. It's a place where the past meets the present, where myths are born and reborn, and where the echoes of history continue to resonate in the hearts and minds of those who dare to listen. The rising sun spills over the rooftops of Tyre, casting a golden hue on the bustling port below. You, a Phoenician sailor with salt still clinging to your skin from yesterday's journey, are about to dive headfirst into the chaotic symphony that is ancient trade. Welcome to the 9th century BC, where Tyre is the Las Vegas of the Mediterranean, minus the slot machines, and with a lot more cedar wood. Your day kicks off in the marketplace, where the air is a heady mix of brine and spices. It's a scene straight out of a chaotic painting, merchants shouting offers, buyers haggling over prices. You're here for one thing, purple dye, and not just any shade of purple, the infamous Tyrian purple, the color of royalty. This dye is the reason your city is on every wealthy ruler's speed dial. Well, if they had phones. Each drop of this liquid gold is worth its weight in. Well, gold. The process of making it involves crushing thousands of murex snails. Glamorous, right? It's a smelly, painstaking task, but when a kilogram of this dye fetches more than a year's wages for a common laborer, the stench is easy to overlook. But let's not kid ourselves. The dye isn't the only hot commodity in town. Cedar wood is Tyre's other golden ticket. Known for its durability and pleasant aroma, cedar is the ancient world's version of a must-have IKEA flat pack, only without the need for Allen wrenches. Pharaohs and kings clamor for it to construct palaces and temples that scrape the sky. So, here you are, a cog in the Phoenician trade machine, ready to load up your ship with these treasures and set sail across the Mediterranean expanse. As you navigate the docks, you can't help but marvel at the organized chaos. Ships of every size are anchored, their sails fluttering like the wings of resting birds. Each vessel is a testament to the ingenuity of Phoenician shipbuilders, who've turned the sea into their personal highway. And if you think parallel parking is hard, try maneuvering one of these bad boys through a narrow harbor. The logistics are mind-boggling. A single ship can carry upwards of 100 tons of cargo, destined for far-flung ports like Carthage, Gades, or even the distant shores of Britannia. Today, your ship will be carrying a mix of cedar logs and amphorae filled with the precious dye. As you and your fellow sailors start loading the cargo, you can't help but think of the complexities of your trade routes. Phoenician sailors like you have essentially invented the ancient version of Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day shipping guarantee. Your voyages connect disparate cultures, spreading goods and ideas, and occasionally the odd sailor's tale. And speaking of tales, let's talk about the price of a sail. Not the monetary kind, but the cost of being at the mercy of the sea. The Mediterranean is no placid pond. Storms can roll in faster than you can say Poseidon's trident, and pirates, yes, the real swashbuckling kind, are always lurking, eager to relieve you of your hard-earned cargo. It's a high-risk, high-reward game, but the thrill of the trade keeps you coming back. As the sun climbs higher, you pause to take in the spectacle of Tyre. This city isn't just a hub of commerce. It's a melting pot of cultures. Greeks, Egyptians, Assyrians, all mingling in a stew of languages and customs. Your Phoenician knack for diplomacy is as legendary as your sailing skills, a necessity in a world where alliances can be as fickle as the weather. By midday, the ship is loaded and ready to go. You gather with your crew, a band of seasoned sailors who've seen it all. There's a camaraderie here, forged by countless days and nights spent under the same stars. With a final check of the rigging, you cast off, leaving behind the safety of the harbor for the open sea. This isn't just a job. It's a way of life, one that's been passed down through generations and will likely continue long after you've hung up your sandals. The sun's rays dance on the waves as your ship slices through the water, propelled by the wind. You're off to your next destination, eager to trade goods and stories alike. It's a life of adventure and uncertainty, but one that promises endless possibilities. As Tyre fades into the horizon, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're part of an ancient legacy, a sailor of the sea, a bearer of the purple dye and cedar wood that fuel the dreams of empires. And as the day unfolds, you know one thing for certain. The Mediterranean is your canvas, and you're painting it with the colors of commerce and culture. As the salty breeze fills the sails, you leave behind the vibrant chaos of Tyre, setting your course for distant shores. Out here, the sea is both your highway and your nemesis, a vast, unpredictable expanse that demands respect and cunning. But don't worry, you're not relying on the stars aligning just right, or a divine hand to guide you. The Phoenicians were the original navigational ninjas, long before anyone even dreamed of a compass, let alone GPS. How did they do it? Well, the secret sauce is a mix of celestial navigation and keen observation. You've got your eyes peeled for the North Star, Polaris, which is as reliable as a Swiss watch when it comes to pointing north. And during the day, The sun's position is your best friend, helping you figure out east and west. But let's not pretend it's all smooth sailing. Cloudy nights can turn the sea into a disorienting abyss, and when the weather decides to throw a tantrum, you might find yourself playing a high-stakes guessing game with your life on the line. Now, let's talk about your shipmates. These aren't just your co-workers, they're your lifeline. A Phoenician ship is a microcosm of society, with its own set of rules and hierarchy. There's no HR department to file grievances, but there is a captain whose word is law. He's more likely to settle disputes with a stern look or a well-timed shout than with a mediation session. The crew is a motley collection of seasoned sailors and greenhorns, all bound by the same salty fate. They're as diverse as the ports you visit, each bringing their own language and customs to the mix. It's a floating Tower of Babel, but somehow it works. And what about sustenance on this maritime adventure? Let's paint a not-so-gourmet picture: hardtack and water. Hardtack, the ancient equivalent of a protein bar, is a rock-hard biscuit that could double as a weapon in a pinch. It's not winning any culinary awards, but it keeps you going. Water is rationed like liquid gold. You're not exactly luxuriating in Evian, more like praying that the barrels don't run dry before you reach your next port. The sea might be everywhere, but drinking it would be a one-way ticket to insanity via dehydration. But let's address the elephant, or rather, the pirate, in the room. Pirates are the original workplace hazard for a Phoenician sailor. These aren't the lovable rogues of cinema lore. They're opportunistic sea wolves ready to strip your ship bare. The best defense: speed and cunning. Phoenician ships are built for swiftness, a necessity when outrunning a pirate vessel. The trick is to spot them before they spot you, a task easier said than done when everyone's trying to blend into the blue expanse. There's a common myth that the sea is a great equalizer, but in truth, it's a stage for drama and danger. The sea doesn't care if you're rich or poor, experienced or newbie, it'll toss you around just the same. And yet out here, you find a sort of camaraderie born of shared hardship. It's a fraternity of the waves, where everyone's survival depends on everyone else's skill and nerve. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Why does all this matter? Well, the Phoenicians are more than just traders. They're cultural conduits. They're the ancient world's internet, spreading ideas and innovations from one corner of the Mediterranean to the other. Every port they visit is a node in this vast network, a place where goods are exchanged and knowledge is shared. These voyages aren't just about economic gain. They're about enriching cultures, forging connections, and occasionally sowing the seeds of future empires. But let's not kid ourselves. The romance of the sea is often overshadowed by its brutal reality. Every journey is a gamble, a roll of the dice against the whims of weather and the threat of piracy. Yet, for a Phoenician sailor, the call of the sea is irresistible. It's a life of endless horizons and constant movement, where the next adventure is just beyond the curve of the earth. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, you're reminded of why you choose this life. It's not just a job, it's a legacy, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. You're part of a grand tradition, a living link in a chain that stretches back through the centuries. And as the stars begin to twinkle overhead, you feel a deep connection to the sailors who came before you and those who will follow. The sea is your canvas, and tonight, under the watchful gaze of the North Star, you're ready to paint your next masterpiece. As the canvas of night stretches over the Mediterranean, the horizon begins to reveal the silhouette of Carthage. A city that once was just a fledgling Phoenician colony now thrums with the pulse of a bustling metropolis. The air hums with anticipation, as you and your crew ready yourselves to dock. Carthage, the jewel in the crown of Phoenician settlements, is a place where politics and commerce dance a complex tango, one that affects every sailor, merchant, and king within its orbit. Carthage wasn't built in a day, but its strategic brilliance was certainly no accident. Established around 814 BC, give or take a few years, by settlers from Tyre, this city was a masterclass in urban planning and political savvy. Positioned on the North African coast, it was like the Wi-Fi router of the ancient Mediterranean, connecting trade routes that stretched from the Levant to the Iberian Peninsula and beyond. The port itself is an engineering marvel with its double harbor, one for warships, another for merchant vessels, making it both a fortress and a gateway. Talk about dual-purpose real estate. As your ship glides into the harbor, you can't help but notice the organized chaos. Carthage is a melting pot, the kind of place where you're as likely to hear someone haggling in Punic as you are in Greek or Latin. The city's population is a diverse mix, reflecting the vast web of trade networks it commands. It's a place where a Phoenician sailor can feel both at home and a stranger in the same breath. But Carthage wasn't just about trade, it was a cultural powerhouse. Let's talk about the alphabet, the real MVP of Phoenician exports. The Phoenicians didn't invent writing, but they did create a streamlined, 22-character alphabet that was the Twitter of its time. It was efficient, easy to learn, and spread faster than a viral cat meme. The Greeks, ever the innovators, saw its potential and adapted it, passing it down the line until it morphed into the alphabet you're reading now. So, next time you text a friend, give a nod to those ancient scribes who set the whole thing in motion. Now, let's bust some myths. The romantic image of Phoenicians as benign traders spreading culture like benevolent merchants of enlightenment is, well, a bit rose-tinted. Colonization was as much about strategic dominance as it was about trade. Carthage was the centerpiece of a network designed to control the Western Mediterranean, a geopolitical chessboard that would make Game of Thrones look like checkers. The city was a hub of power, and its leaders, known as Suffites, were as shrewd as they come, balancing alliances and rivalries with the skill of a seasoned poker player. Economically, Carthage was a juggernaut. The city minted its own coins, a sign of its economic independence and might. These coins, often featuring images of the mighty war god Baal or the protective goddess Tanit, were more than just currency. They were diplomatic tools, spreading Carthaginian influence wherever they were exchanged. The city's wealth was built on a foundation of trade goods like precious metals, textiles, and foodstuffs. It was said that Carthage could feed its population for 30 years without importing a single grain. Try finding that kind of food security in our just-in-time delivery world. Carthage wasn't just a player, it was a contender. But with great power comes great paranoia, rightfully so, given the city's eventual fate at the hands of Rome. Yet, for now, in this moment of history, Carthage is at its zenith, a beacon of Phoenician ingenuity and adaptability. It's a reminder that in the ancient world, as now, power often hinges on those who can best navigate the tides of change. You step ashore, feeling the familiar crunch of sand underfoot. The city sprawls before you, a tapestry of bustling markets, towering temples, and echoing amphitheaters. Here, the lines between myth and reality blur, where every stone might tell a story of triumph or tragedy. It's a place that challenges you to reconsider everything you think you know about ancient colonization. It's easy to romanticize the past, but the reality is often as gritty as the sand stuck in your sandals. As you wander through the vibrant chaos of Carthage, you realize that you're not just a sailor. You're a participant in a grand narrative that stretches across time and sea. Every Phoenician voyage is a thread in the tapestry of history, weaving connections that bind cultures even as they clash. You're reminded that while the Phoenicians may not have left great monuments like the pyramids or the Parthenon, their legacy is just as enduring. They left behind something far more subtle but infinitely more powerful, a way of connecting people and ideas across vast distances. Carthage stands as a testament to the power of commerce and culture to shape the world. It's a city built on the convergence of trade winds and human ambition. As you prepare to continue your journey, you're struck by the realization that though the world may change, the fundamental drive to explore and connect remains the same. The sea, in all its unpredictable majesty, is still the great unifier, a constant in a world of change. With a nod to the bustling port behind you, you rejoin your crew, ready to set sail once more. The Mediterranean is your canvas, and Carthage has added its own vibrant hue to your journey. As your ship slips back out to sea, you carry with you the stories and secrets of a city that has, for a moment, been the center of your world. And with each wave that laps against the hull, you're reminded that history is not just something that happens. It's something we create, one voyage at a time. As your ship fades into the horizon, you're reminded of the tapestry of lives that make up the Phoenician experience. But let's not spend too much time waxing poetic. We've got a boat to run, and an afternoon to dive into the social and religious dynamics of life at sea. Now, you might think a Phoenician ship was just a floating frat house, but hold onto your amphorae because the reality is a bit more nuanced. Yes, the crew is predominantly male, But women aren't unheard of in this maritime milieu. In fact, records suggest that women occasionally took to the sea, particularly in roles like priestesses or even merchants. While not the norm, these exceptions point to a complex social structure where gender roles were sometimes as fluid as the sea itself. It's a reality the ancient Greeks would have probably scoffed at while sipping their wine, but there it is. And speaking of wine, let's talk about religion. Religion wasn't just something you pondered on a lazy Sunday. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life. On board, you'd find small altars or shrines dedicated to a pantheon of gods who were probably the busiest deities in the ancient world. The big three: Melkart, Baal, and Tanit. Melkart was the Herculean figure you'd pray to for protection. Baal was your god for favorable weather patterns, essential when a storm could upend your day or your life. And Tanit was the motherly figure ensuring your safe passage and perhaps a little luck. The rituals, were as colorful as a Tyrian purple cloak. Sacrifices, incense, and offerings were par for the course. Let's be real, when you're at the mercy of the Mediterranean's whims, you'd hedge your bets too. What's a little incense compared to the promise of calm seas? The ship itself was considered a sacred space, with the prow often adorned with eyes to ward off evil spirits. So next time you see a ship's figurehead, remember, it's not just decorative, it's ancient security tech. Now, let's get back to the nitty-gritty. Life aboard isn't all piety and prayer. The romantic notion of freedom at sea is often overshadowed by the harsh reality of survival. Being a Phoenician sailor was less about living a Jack Sparrow fantasy and more about managing risk. You're not just battling the elements. You're grappling with the logistics of navigation, the threat of piracy, and the challenge of keeping a motley crew in line. There's a popular myth that life at sea offered unrivaled freedom. Sure, you could escape the land's oppressive hierarchies and taxes, but you traded them for the sea's own brand of tyranny. Every decision was a gamble, every wave a potential disaster. It's said that fortune favors the bold, but out here, it's more like fortune favors those who can read the weather and row like hell when it turns against them. And let's not forget the economics of it all. These voyages were costly ventures. A ship could cost the equivalent of millions in today's currency, with the crew's wages adding to the tab. The stakes were high, and failure wasn't just a personal loss. It could spell ruin for the investors back home. In this dog-eat-dog world, survival often depended more on luck than skill, a sobering thought when you're staring down a storm cloud that could swallow your ship whole. But let's not get too morose. There's camaraderie here, a bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Your fellow sailors are your brothers and sisters, occasionally in arms, and the friendships formed at sea often outlasted the journeys themselves. You've swapped stories, shared meals, and faced death together. Out here, community isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a necessity. As the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the deck, you find a moment of quiet contemplation. The rhythmic sound of the sea against the hull is a lullaby that has rocked generations of sailors into a gentle peace. It's a reminder that while the sea is unpredictable, it's also a constant, a force that connects and divides in equal measure. And in that, there's a kind of poetry that even the most hardened sailor can appreciate. So, as you adjust the sails and prepare for whatever the evening may bring, you carry with you the stories of those who have come before. Each journey is a chapter in the ongoing saga of the Phoenician people, a tale of resilience, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of the horizon. And as the stars begin to twinkle above, you know that while the sea may be a harsh mistress, she's also the keeper of secrets and dreams, the canvas upon which you paint your own legend. Stay tuned, because this afternoon is just one brushstroke in the grand masterpiece that is the life of a Phoenician sailor. There's more to explore, more tales to tell, and plenty of myths left to bust wide open. After all, history waits for no one, and neither does the sea. As the afternoon drifts lazily into evening, the ship makes its steady way back to the familiar embrace of Tyre. The sun, like a show-off artist, paints the sky in dramatic hues of orange and purple, a fitting nod to the city's famous dye. You've navigated the bustling ports of Carthage, dodged the ever-present threat of piracy, and now, as the horizon draws you homeward, it's time for some reflection. Let's talk Phoenicians, those enigmatic traders of yore who left a legacy as vast as the sea they sailed. Now, there's a persistent myth that the Phoenicians vanished into the annals of history like a magician's disappearing act. But the truth is far less glamorous and much more mundane. They didn't fade into oblivion. They were absorbed, assimilated into the swelling tide of empires like the Assyrians, Babylonians, and eventually the Romans. Their cities became bustling hubs under new management, and their culture, like a well-mixed cocktail, blended into the broader Mediterranean tapestry. So they didn't disappear. They went corporate. Let's dig a bit deeper. The Phoenicians were masters of adaptability. They were the ancient world's version of strategic consultants, thriving by aligning themselves with powerful neighbors. Their skill wasn't just in navigating the seas, but also in navigating politics. When Tyre fell to Alexander the Great in 332 BC, it wasn't the end, more like a corporate merger. The city continued to be a cultural and economic center under new rulers, and Phoenician influence spread into the Greek and Roman worlds, with their alphabet paving the way for written communication as we know it. Speaking of navigation, the Phoenicians were the OGs of sea travel, long before Columbus or Magellan ever charted their courses. They were using the North Star to guide them centuries before GPS made life boringly precise. Their ships were like ancient Ubers, minus the surge pricing, swift and reliable, with cedar wood construction that could withstand the Mediterranean's temper tantrums. This maritime prowess wasn't just about exploration. It was about building a network, a web of connections that stitched together disparate cultures and economies. And let's not forget the economic impact. The Phoenicians laid the groundwork for modern commerce, introducing trade practices that would be the envy of any Wall Street broker. They were pioneers of free trade zones, long before the term was coined, creating a world where goods and ideas flowed freely. A Phoenician ship was a floating marketplace, carrying everything from precious metals and textiles to the much-coveted purple dye. It's like they invented globalization before it was cool. Now, back to Tyre, a city that was both home and launchpad. As the ship glides into port, you're reminded of its significance. Tyre wasn't just a place, it was a phenomenon. It was here that the Phoenicians honed their skills, learning to balance the demands of trade with the complexities of diplomacy. The city was a microcosm of their world, bustling, diverse, and ever-adapting. It was a place where cultures collided, producing a spark of innovation that would light up the ancient world. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The romantic notion of the Phoenicians as peaceful traders spreading enlightenment is a bit of a rose-tinted view. Sure, they were traders, but they were also shrewd strategists, carving out a niche in a world dominated by empires far larger than their city-states. Their legacy isn't just one of cultural exchange, but of survival and adaptation in a cutthroat environment. They were the small fish in a big pond, and they played the game with skill and cunning. As the sun sets over Tyre, casting long shadows on the bustling port, it's time to consider the broader legacy of these seafaring pioneers. Their contributions to navigation, trade, and culture set the stage for future explorers and traders, leaving a mark as deep and enduring as the furrows plowed by their ships. They were the unsung architects of the modern world, building bridges across seas long before the term global village was penned. So, as you step back onto solid ground, you carry with you the stories of a people who knew no boundaries, whose lives were a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. The Phoenicians were more than just sailors or traders. They were visionaries, weaving a tapestry of connections that would shape the world for centuries to come. And as you look to the horizon, you're reminded that history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative, one that we continue to write with every step, every sail, and every journey. In the grand theater of history, the Phoenicians played their part with aplomb, leaving a legacy that echoes through time. They may not have left behind grand monuments or empires that stood the test of time, but their influence is woven into the fabric of our modern world. They were the trailblazers, the navigators of uncharted waters, the proto-globalists who dared to dream beyond the horizon. And as you prepare to rest, with the sea's lullaby still echoing in your ears, you realize that in the end, it's not the monuments or the conquests that endure, it's the connections we forge and the paths we chart. That's the true legacy of the Phoenicians, and it's a story worth telling, one voyage at a time. The bustling streets of Salonika, now Thessaloniki, were a melting pot of cultures at the dawn of the 20th century, and right in the middle of it all was a young boy named Mustafa. Born in 1881 into a world where the Ottoman Empire was creaking at the seams, Mustafa Kemal would grow up to be the architect of modern Turkey. But before he could reshape a nation, he had to navigate his way through an education system as chaotic as a cat in a room full of laser pointers. Mustafa's early years were spent in a household that was, by all accounts, middle class. His father, Ali Reza, dabbled in various enterprises, from lumber trading to government work, none of which secured the family fortune. In a twist of fate that would make even a soap opera writer pause, Ali Reza passed away when Mustafa was just a child, leaving his mother, Zubid, to steer the family ship through turbulent waters. Zubid, with her unyielding spirit, played a pivotal role in Mustafa's education, enrolling him in a secular school despite the conservative leanings of many around her. This decision was like planting a sapling in rocky soil. It was unconventional, but vital for future growth. Now, young Mustafa wasn't exactly the kind of student who blended into the background. No, he was more like that one student who always had his hand up, ready to challenge the teacher on every point. His love for debating didn't just annoy his teachers. It laid the foundation for his later years, where he'd turn dinner tables into platforms for discussion. Fast forward a couple of years, and Mustafa found himself at the military academy in Manastir, now Bitola, North Macedonia, with his head buried in books about revolutionary ideas and his heart set on military strategy. Here, he discovered a knack for leadership, as well as a penchant for poking holes in the doctrines of the time. Mustafa's military education wasn't just about marching and maneuvers. It was a crucible for forming his ideas about nationalism and reform. Picture this: a young cadet, uniform crisp and mind sharp, debating late into the night about the future of the Ottoman Empire, probably with a cup of strong coffee in hand to ward off the sleep that had no place in his grand plans. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a thinker, a planner, and above all, a believer in change. This was the training ground for the man who would later be known for his decisive and sometimes ruthless reforms. By the time he graduated in 1905, Mustafa was a man on a mission. He entered the army as a staff officer, which sounds like a cushy desk job, but in the Ottoman military, it was anything but. He was stationed in places like Damascus and Libya, where he got a first-hand look at the empire's cracks and crumbles. But let's not get too romantic. Life in Damascus wasn't all grand vistas and exotic bazaars. Mustafa dealt with the grit and grind, often facing incompetence and corruption that would make a modern politician blush. Through these experiences, he developed a visceral understanding that the empire needed more than just a facelift. It required a total renovation. One of Mustafa's most formative experiences came during the Italo-Turkish War in 1911. While the Ottomans were busy trying to fend off Italy's advances on Libya, Mustafa was busy proving his mettle. Imagine the audacity. Here was a relatively junior officer, organizing guerrilla tactics against a European power. His efforts didn't just win battles, they won him respect and recognition. It was like watching an underdog team take on a league champion and actually score. Despite his growing reputation, Mustafa wasn't just a man of the battlefield. He was a man of ideas. He was known to gather friends and colleagues, turning casual dinners into lively debates about everything from military tactics to political theory. Imagine inviting Mustafa over for a simple meal, only to find yourself embroiled in a heated discussion about the future of the state. It said he could argue until the cows came home, and then argue with the cows, too. By the time World War I unfolded, Mustafa's career was gaining momentum faster than a runaway train. He played a crucial role in the Gallipoli campaign, where his leadership helped prevent the Allied forces from breaking through. The brutal and bloody defense became a defining moment, not just for Mustafa, but for the entire Ottoman Empire. It was here that he showcased his ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome, a skill set that would later serve him well in the political arena. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Gallipoli campaign was no picnic. It was a grueling, grinding war of attrition that saw Mustafa make decisions that would keep the enemy at bay, but also take a staggering human toll. Thousands of lives were lost, and the land was soaked with the blood of soldiers from all corners of the globe. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, Mustafa managed to emerge as a hero, though the cost was immeasurable. What set Mustafa apart was his clarity of vision. He wasn't just fighting for territory. He was fighting for a future he could barely see but profoundly believed in. He had a knack for cutting through the fog of war to focus on what really mattered. Some called it brilliance, others called it luck. Whatever it was, it worked. As the war drew to a close and the Ottoman Empire began its final descent, Mustafa found himself at a crossroads. He had witnessed the empire's decline firsthand and understood that something radically different was needed. This was more than just a career pivot. It was a full-scale leap into the unknown. Mustafa was setting the stage for a new chapter, not just for himself, but for an entire nation. And so, with the war's end came a new beginning. Mustafa would soon become Atatürk, the father of the Turks. But for now, he was still Mustafa, armed with a vision and a determination to see it through. As he moved from soldier to statesman, the world waited to see what this audacious, argumentative leader would do next. Would he succeed in dragging a reluctant nation into modernity, or would he be just another footnote in the annals of history? Stay tuned, because the ride was just getting started. As the dust of World War I began to settle, Mustafa wasn't just basking in the glow of victory. He was already planning his next move like a chess grandmaster eyeing the board. But let's rewind a bit to the Gallipoli campaign, where his star truly began to rise. Now, if you've ever thought of warfare as a chaotic carnival of unpredictability, Gallipoli was the full-blown circus. The campaign was a logistical nightmare that would give any modern planner cold sweats. Picture this, a narrow strait separating Europe from Asia, defended by cliffs taller than a skyscraper and warders as treacherous as a game of Monopoly with your in-laws. Into this maelstrom walked Mustafa, not just another cog in the Ottoman machine, but a man with a plan. His role, a divisional commander in a setting where every decision was a gamble with lives on the line. The Gallipoli campaign, which raged from April 1915 to January 1916, was like playing chess on a board where the squares kept moving and the pieces had minds of their own. The Allies thought they'd stroll through the Dardanelles like it was a walk in the park. Little did they know they were up against a leader who viewed the battlefield as a giant game of three-dimensional chess. It wasn't all strategy and glory, though. The absurdity of trench warfare was on full display here, with soldiers entrenched in mud pits that made a pigsty look sanitary. Disease was as much a foe as the enemy across no man's land, and if the bullets didn't get you, the dysentery might. Yet Mustafa, with a hawk's eye for opportunity, found ways to turn even this grim setting to his advantage. He orchestrated a defense that was as audacious as it was effective, turning back the tide of the Allied advance with tactics that seemed almost too clever for their own good. His troops, inspired by his unyielding resolve, held firm against waves of assaults. But let's bust some myths here. Mustafa wasn't some invincible super soldier dodging bullets like he was in a video game. He took risks that could have ended his career faster than you can say court-martial. There were moments when his luck seemed to teeter on the edge of disaster. One narrow escape came during an artillery barrage that landed so close, it was as if the shells had his name on them. Yet he emerged unscathed, though not entirely by design. Luck, fate, or perhaps the universe's dark sense of humor seemed to favor him, but let's not pretend he was just a pawn of fortune. His strategic acumen was real, as was his ability to inspire those around him. A defining moment came during the battle for Chunuk in August 1915. The Allies launched what they hoped would be a knockout blow. Mustafa, with the instincts of a gambler at the poker table, moved his troops to plug a gap in the lines at the last possible moment. It was a decision with slim odds, but it paid off, turning potential disaster into a defensive triumph. His actions here weren't just about winning a battle, they were about proving that the Ottoman Empire still had fight left in it. The myth of his invincibility is tempting but misleading. Mustafa was as human as the rest of us, with grit and determination that often masked the precariousness of his situation. His ability to read the battlefield was almost preternatural, but it wasn't foolproof. Some might call him a daredevil, others a tactical genius. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. He wasn't immune to the fog of war, but his clarity amidst chaos set him apart. Gallipoli was his proving ground, a place where legends were born, and yet it was also a crucible of suffering that left scars on everyone involved. Economically, the campaign was a sinkhole of resources. The Ottoman Empire, already on shaky financial legs, poured men and material into the fight with the desperation of a gambler down to his last chip. The human cost was staggering. Over 250,000 Ottoman soldiers were killed or wounded, a grim testament to the campaign's toll. This wasn't just a battle of guns and grenades. It was a brutal reminder of war's capacity to consume lives like a black hole devouring stars. Yet, out of this carnage, Mustafa emerged as a national hero, his reputation cemented by acts of valor and strategic brilliance. His leadership at Gallipoli was a beacon of hope in a war that seemed to offer little else. To his men, he was more than a commander. He was a symbol of resistance, a living testament to the idea that Turkey could stand its ground against the mightiest of foes. The narrative of invincibility was seductive, but the truth was that Mustafa Kemal's power lay in his ability to adapt, to see possibilities where others saw only dead ends. As the campaign dragged on, the absurdities of trench warfare became increasingly apparent. Soldiers lived in squalor, confronted daily by the grim realities of the front. The trenches, teeming with rats and disease, were a world unto themselves. For Mustafa, navigating this hellscape required more than just military acumen. It demanded an iron will and a touch of audacity. In the end, the Gallipoli campaign was a stalemate, a bloody deadlock that left both sides reeling. But for Mustafa, it was a turning point. His success at Gallipoli wasn't just a military victory, it was a personal one, propelling him into the spotlight and setting the stage for his future political endeavors. The nation saw in him a figure capable of leading them out of the quagmire of war and into a new era. Yet, the path wasn't clear-cut. The Ottoman Empire, battered and beleaguered, was on the brink of collapse, and the challenges ahead were as daunting as the cliffs of Gallipoli. As the echoes of battle faded, Mustafa's journey was far from over. The stage was set for a transformation that would redefine a nation, but the road ahead was fraught with peril. Would he be able to navigate the treacherous waters of politics as deftly as he had the battlefield? As the curtain fell on the Gallipoli campaign, the world watched and waited for the next act in the drama of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the man who would become the architect of modern Turkey. The story was only beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. Stay tuned, because the ride is far from over. As the curtain fell on the Gallipoli campaign, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk found himself standing at the precipice of an empire's collapse. The Ottoman Empire, once the sprawling titan of the East, was now little more than a ghost, its territories picked apart by vultures of war and diplomacy. Picture a grand old mansion, now crumbling and overrun with ivy, and you have a sense of the chaos that reigned. Yet, amidst this wreckage, Mustafa wasn't just picking up the pieces, he was eyeing a complete renovation. The end of World War I in 1918 left the Ottoman Empire on life support, its fate seemingly sealed by the Treaty of Sevres in 1920. This agreement was like the empire's epitaph, carving up its lands like a pie at a dysfunctional family gathering. But Mustafa wasn't about to let his homeland be reduced to crumbs. No, he had a vision, a modern, sovereign Turkey, risen from the ashes like a phoenix with an attitude. His first move, rallying the nationalists. While the Ottoman government in Istanbul was busy signing away the empire's future, Mustafa was lighting up the Anatolian heartland with a call to arms. It was the birth of the Turkish War of Independence, a conflict that was as much about reclaiming territory as it was about reclaiming identity. It wasn't just a war, it was a statement, a loud, defiant, not today, to the powers that thought Turkey was down for the count. Mustafa's strategy was a masterclass in political deftness. Think of it as chess, but with bayonets. He convened the Grand National Assembly in Ankara in 1920, effectively setting up a parallel government. It was like forming a startup while your old company was going bankrupt. The message was clear. Istanbul might be the seat of the past, but Ankara was the capital of the future. His political savvy didn't stop there. Mustafa knew that a good leader doesn't just bark orders. He inspires, cajoles, and occasionally cracks a joke at the right moment. His use of humor was legendary, a tool to disarm opponents and win over skeptics. During one tense negotiation, said he quipped, "If I agreed with you, we'd both be wrong." It was this blend of charm and steel that rallied troops and galvanized support across the fractious factions of Turkey. The Turkish War of Independence raged from 1919 to 1923, a brutal affair that saw Mustafa navigate a landscape littered with both literal and political landmines. His army, initially ragtag and under-equipped, was transformed into a disciplined force. The numbers tell the story. By 1922, the Turkish forces had swelled to over 200,000 strong, a testament to Mustafa's ability to inspire and organize. Economically, Turkey was on the ropes, but Mustafa played the long game. He understood that a modern nation needed more than just military might. It required an economic engine. Even as battles raged, he laid the groundwork for industrialization and reform. It was a bit like trying to renovate a house while still living in it, a delicate balance, but one he seemed almost born to achieve. By the time the dust settled, Mustafa had done the impossible. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 was the diplomatic equivalent of turning the Titanic away from the iceberg. Here, Mustafa negotiated with the Allies like a poker player with nerves of steel. The stakes, the very future of Turkey. Against the odds, he secured terms that recognized the sovereignty of the new Turkish Republic, effectively erasing the humiliations of the Treaty of Sevres. At Lausanne, Mustafa was in his element. With the Allies expecting a pushover, he flipped the script, refusing to fold under pressure. His negotiating tactics were as sharp as his battlefield maneuvers. When faced with demands that would have left Turkey weak and dependent, he stood firm. "We are not a defeated nation," he declared, a line that resonated like a shot across the bow. The economic implications of Lausanne were profound. Mustafa secured control over critical resources and territories, setting the stage for Turkey's economic recovery. The treaty wasn't just a diplomatic victory, it was a lifeline pulling Turkey back from the brink and into the modern era. Yet, let's not romanticize too much. The Lausanne Conference was no quaint tea party. It was a grueling, months-long affair that tested the patience and resolve of all involved. Mustafa's ability to play hardball while maintaining a poker face was crucial. He knew when to hold them, when to fold them, and most importantly, when to walk away, or at least threaten to. In the end, Lausanne was a turning point, not just for Mustafa, but for Turkey itself. It marked the birth of a nation, forged in the fires of war and tempered by the anvil of diplomacy. Mustafa had achieved what many thought impossible. He had reshaped the destiny of his people, turning a battered empire into a reborn republic. This transformation didn't just happen overnight. It was the result of relentless determination, an unyielding belief in the future, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk wasn't just leading a nation. He was redefining what that nation could be. The ride was far from over, and the work had only just begun. The next chapters in Turkey's story were waiting to be written, and Mustafa was ready to pick up the pen. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the fascinating saga of Atatürk's relentless quest to modernize and transform Turkey. And so, the ink was barely dry on the Treaty of Lausanne when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the man with a penchant for rewriting the rules, set about the Herculean task of dragging Turkey into the 20th century, kicking and screaming if necessary. Picture a nation trying to change gears without a clutch, and you've got a sense of the challenges ahead. But Atatürk had no intention of idling in neutral. He was hell-bent on transforming Turkey from a feudal relic into a modern republic. First on his checklist was language reform. Let's face it, the Ottoman script was about as intuitive as trying to read a book upside down in a mirror. So, in 1928, Atatürk decided it was high time to switch to the Latin alphabet. This wasn't just a cosmetic change, it was a full-scale linguistic revolution. The goal, to boost literacy and connect Turkey more closely with the Western world. It wasn't a half-baked idea either. In less than 2 years, literacy rates shot up from around 10% to nearly 30%. If that isn't a testament to the power of a good alphabet makeover, I don't know what is. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of a literacy utopia. The switch came with its fair share of chaos and resistance. Imagine waking up one day to find that your entire written language has been replaced, and you have to learn it anew. For many, it was like being told to swap chopsticks for a fork and knife overnight. The economic cost was significant too. Printing new textbooks, retraining teachers, and spreading the word, in a very literal sense, across a nation wasn't exactly cheap. But Atatürk was a man on a mission, and he wasn't about to let a little thing like public opinion slow him down. Next up was education reform. Atatürk wanted to yank Turkey out of the Dark Ages by implementing a secular education system. This was a bold move in a country where religion and education had been as intertwined as spaghetti and meatballs. By 1933, he'd established a unified national education system, free from religious influence. He brought in experts from Europe, like John Dewey, to help design a curriculum that was as modern as it was ambitious. Number of primary schools expanded rapidly, with student enrollment increasing from 342,000 in 1923 to over 1.2 million by 1940. It was like watching a nation leapfrog through history at breakneck speed. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with these changes. Some saw Atatürk's reforms as an assault on traditional values, a sentiment that spilled over into resistance and unrest. The men's dress law of 1925, which mandated the wearing of the Western-style hat, known as the Hat Law, was particularly controversial. The fez, a symbol of Ottoman identity, was banished in favor of brimmed hats. This might sound like a Monty Python skit, but the backlash was fierce. There were protests, riots, and yes, even executions for those who defied the law. It turns out, when you mess with headgear, you mess with heads. Who knew hats could be so incendiary? These sweeping reforms came with a hefty price tag, not just economically but socially. Urban areas began to modernize rapidly, while rural communities lagged, creating a widening gap between the two. The economic cost of Atatürk's reforms was staggering. By the early 1930s, Turkey's national debt had ballooned to 250 million lira, a hefty sum considering the fledgling state's limited resources. Atatürk's vision was clear, but the path was fraught with obstacles. Yet it's easy to see why the myth of the infallible reformer persists. Atatürk's charisma was undeniable, his speeches electrifying. He had a knack for encapsulating complex ideas into digestible sound bites. "Peace at home, peace in the world," he proclaimed, a line that resonated deeply with a nation weary of war and strife. But behind the rhetoric was a pragmatist who understood that real change often comes at a cost. The secularization of Turkey extended beyond schools. Atatürk abolished the caliphate in 1924, a move that effectively severed the state's ties with religious governance. This was nothing short of revolutionary, akin to separating church and state in a society where they'd been practically conjoined twins. Religious courts were replaced with secular ones, and Islamic law gave way to a new civil code, inspired by Switzerland's. The changes were as sweeping as they were controversial, sparking debates that echo in Turkey's political landscape to this day. Atatürk's economic reforms were another cornerstone of his modernization efforts. He launched the statism policy, aiming to jumpstart industrialization through state-led initiatives. By the mid-1930s, Turkey had established several state enterprises in key sectors, from textiles to steel. The Suma Bank, set up in 1933, became a linchpin of industrial development, funding factories and providing loans for new projects. These efforts paid off, with the industrial sector growing at an annual rate of 10% between 1930 and 1940, not too shabby for a nation that had been scraping by on agriculture just a decade earlier. But let's not sugarcoat it. Atatürk's vision of a modern Turkey was not universally embraced. The economic and social upheaval his policies wrought left many feeling alienated. For the conservative and rural populations, the rapid pace of change was disorienting, even threatening. Resistance simmered beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over into open defiance. The Kurdish uprisings of the 1920s and 30s, fueled by ethnic and religious tensions, were stark reminders that not everyone was on board with Atatürk's vision. In the face of such opposition, Atatürk wielded power with an iron grip. Political dissent was not tolerated, and opposition parties found themselves stifled or outright banned. It was a heavy-handed approach that left a lasting impact on Turkey's political culture. The paradox of Atatürk's legacy is that while he championed democracy and modernization, he did so through authoritarian means. It's a contradiction that history wrestles with, like a cat chasing its own tail. Yet, for all the resistance and controversy, there's no denying the impact of Atatürk's reforms. By the time of his death in 1938, Turkey had transformed from the Ottoman Empire's ashes into a sovereign republic with a distinct national identity. Atatürk's legacy is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tribulations, successes and setbacks. His vision of a modern, secular Turkey was realized, but not without costs, both seen and unseen. As we continue to explore Atatürk's towering impact on Turkey, remember that history isn't just about the past. It's a lens through which we view the present. The story of Turkey's modernization is a reminder that progress is often messy, fraught with complications and contradictions. But that's what makes history so captivating. It's a living, breathing narrative, full of twists and turns, heroes and villains, and the occasional mandatory hat law. So stay tuned, because the ride isn't over yet, and there's much more to uncover about the man who dared to reinvent a nation. Atatürk's legacy is a historical kaleidoscope, spinning tales of transformation and turmoil that continue to shape Turkey's present and future. His reforms crafted a nation from the ashes of an empire, but like all great narratives, the story is more than just a highlight reel of triumphs. It's a tapestry woven with threads of controversy and contradiction, a reflection of the man himself, a leader who was as enigmatic as he was visionary. Let's start with the cult of personality that surrounded Atatürk, a phenomenon not just confined to the pages of history, but alive in the hearts and minds of many Turks today. When Mustafa Kemal Pasha morphed into Atatürk, or Father of the Turks, it wasn't just a name change, it was a full-blown rebranding exercise. Think of it as the ultimate personal PR campaign, one that would make any modern influencer blush. His image was meticulously crafted to embody the ideals of a new Turkey, secular, modern, and fiercely independent. Statues, portraits, and his very name became ubiquitous symbols of national pride and unity, strategically placed from bustling city squares to sleepy village corners. Yet, beneath the polished exterior of this larger-than-life figure lies a complex human story. Atatürk was a man of contradictions, a staunch secularist who understood the power of religious symbols, a democrat who wielded authority with an iron fist. He was adored and reviled, a hero to some, a tyrant to others. The myth of Atatürk as a flawless reformer is as tempting as a sugary dessert, but the reality is far more nuanced. His policies shaped a nation, but they also left deep societal rifts that Turkey grapples with to this day. Speaking of grappling, let's not shy away from the more controversial aspects of Atatürk's legacy. His vision of a homogeneous Turkish identity often came at the expense of the country's ethnic and cultural diversity. The suppression of Kurdish identity, language, and culture is a stark reminder that his vision of unity sometimes meant uniformity, a point of contention that continues to reverberate through Turkey's political landscape. The Kurdish issue remains one of Turkey's most enduring challenges, a complex puzzle with roots stretching back to Atatürk's era. Economically, Atatürk's push for industrialization and state-led development laid the groundwork for Turkey's economic growth. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The transition from a predominantly agrarian economy to an industrial one was akin to swapping a donkey cart for a jet plane, exciting, yet fraught with turbulence. By the late 1930s, Turkey's GDP had grown considerably, but the costs were significant. The nation's debt had risen to 400 million lira, a testament to the financial strain of rapid modernization. Atatürk's economic policies were a balancing act between ambition and reality, a tightrope walk that sometimes wobbled but never toppled. If Atatürk's reforms were the heavy lifting of nation-building, his personal quirks provided the lighter, human touch to his legacy. Take his penchant for impromptu dance parties, for instance. Yes, you heard that right. This formidable leader had a soft spot for the tango and the waltz. Picture Atatürk, the architect of a new Turkey, twirling across a ballroom floor with the same gusto he applied to political debates. It was a side of him that revealed a man who, despite the weight of leadership, knew the value of laughter and light-heartedness. His love for dance wasn't just about letting loose. It was a reflection of his broader cultural vision. Atatürk was keen to embrace Western cultural practices, seeing them as symbols of modernity and progress. It's said that he once quipped, "A nation that knows how to dance is a happy nation." Whether or not this sentiment holds true is up for debate, But there's no denying the charm of a leader who could shift from statecraft to the Churcha with equal aplomb. Atatürk's enduring legacy is also evident in the way his image has been preserved and perpetuated through the decades. Visit any Turkish home or office, and you're likely to find a portrait of him gazing down with a mix of sternness and benevolence. The reverence for Atatürk has spawned a sort of secular sainthood, complete with annual commemorations and an ever-present sense of gratitude for the man who carved a new path for Turkey. His mausoleum, Anıtkabir, stands as a testament to his lasting impact, drawing millions of visitors each year who come to pay their respects. Yet, the cult of Atatürk is not without its critics. Some argue that the near-deification of his figure has stifled critical discourse, creating a cultural environment where questioning his policies can be seen as an act of heresy. The balance between reverence and critique is a delicate dance, one that Turkey continues to navigate as it reconciles its past with its future. In the end, Atatürk's legacy is a remarkable blend of vision and veracity, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. He was a man who dared to imagine a future for Turkey that was radically different from its past, and in doing so, he changed the course of history. But like all great figures, his story is not just one of success. It's a narrative rich with complexity, challenge, and contradiction. As we draw the curtain on this exploration of Atatürk's life and legacy, it's clear that his impact is as profound today as it was in his time. The modern Turkish state is a living testament to his vision, yet it also serves as a reminder that the journey of nation-building is never truly complete. Atatürk's story is not simply a chapter in the annals of history. It's an ongoing dialogue about identity, progress, and the ever-elusive quest for balance. So, as you reflect on the life and legacy of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, remember that history is more than just dates and deeds. It's a vibrant, ever-changing tapestry of human experience, filled with the triumphs and tribulations that shape our world. And in the case of Atatürk, it's also a reminder that even the most formidable leaders have their moments of levity, whether on the ballroom floor or the stage of world history. And with that, dear listeners, we wrap up our journey through the life of a man who left an indelible mark on a nation and the world. Whether you admire him, question him, or simply find him fascinating, one thing is certain. Atatürk's legacy is a story worth telling and retelling for generations to come. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, history is made by those who dare to dream big, dance often, and never shy away from a challenge. If you ever thought your daily commute was a drag, spare a thought for the Persian merchants navigating the Silk Road back in 130 BCE. This wasn't a hop on the subway kind of trip. Oh no, we're talking about a 4,000-mile odyssey that made today's logistics look like a quick dash to the corner store. You're about to embark on a journey where camels were the original delivery trucks, and a roll of silk was the kind of luxury item that could make a Roman senator's toga collection look like a fast fashion haul. Welcome to the bustling heart of ancient trade, where every step on the Silk Road echoed with the clatter of hooves and the clink of coins. You're not just moving goods, you're moving cultures, ideas, and enough silk to outfit an aristocratic parade. But let's not romanticize this too much. Sure, the Silk Road sounds like a magical route lined with exotic bazaars and the aroma of spices. But in reality, it was more like a grueling marathon through deserts, mountains, and the occasional bandit-infested territory. Think of it as the world's most intense cross-country relay race, minus the cheering crowd. Now, let's talk camels, your trusty, albeit somewhat grumpy, companions for this long haul. These guys were the MVPs of the ancient transit world. Forget FedEx and UPS. Your packages were strapped onto a caravan of these ships of the desert, trudging along at a pace that would make a snail look like a sprinter. But camels were perfect for the job. They could haul around 500 pounds of goods and go days without water. It's like having a semi-truck that runs on sand and sheer willpower. And what about the goods being transported? Silk, of course. But why was this fabric so sought after? Well, a roll of silk was like the ancient world's version of an iPhone. Everyone wanted it, but not everyone could afford it. A single roll could cost the equivalent of a small fortune, which might explain why merchants were willing to risk life and limb to transport it across continents. Silk wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a status symbol, a diplomatic gift, and a trading chip all rolled into one. You might think that these merchants were just in it for the money, but the Silk Road was a bustling corridor of cultural exchange. Languages, religions, technologies, and even disease, everything was up for grabs. It was like a historical version of the internet, albeit without the memes and cat videos. The road linked the mighty Roman Empire in the west with the flourishing Han dynasty in the east, creating a global web of trade long before the term globalization was ever coined. But let's not gloss over the less glamorous aspects. Traveling the Silk Road was no picnic. You had to be prepared for extreme weather, treacherous terrains, and the constant threat of bandits who saw merchant caravans as mobile piggy banks. The journey could take months, and if you were really unlucky, those months could stretch into years. This wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a test of survival. In the face of such challenges, why did anyone bother with these perilous trade routes? The answer, as always, lies in the economics. The potential profits were astronomical, enough to turn a savvy merchant into a 1%er of the ancient world. Running a successful trade operation meant understanding supply and demand, navigating tariffs, and sometimes even engaging in a bit of espionage to stay ahead of the competition. It was capitalism in its rawest form, with a dash of ancient intrigue. As you trudge along this dusty path, it's easy to romanticize the adventure of it all. But remember, behind every silk roll and exotic spice lay a network of sweat, strategy, and sometimes sheer luck. The Silk Road wasn't just a highway for goods, it was a lifeline for ideas and innovations that would shape the future of civilizations. So, next time you order a package online and complain about the delivery time, just think of those ancient merchants and their epic treks. They were the original trailblazers, paving the way for centuries of trade and cultural exchange. And sure, they might not have had GPS or customer service hotlines, but they sure knew how to move a product. But let's not kid ourselves. Those ancient merchants weren't just out there for fun or the thrill of adventure. Imagine you're a Persian merchant, circa 200 AD, and your job title might sound like something straight out of LinkedIn today. Cross-continental trade specialist with expertise in multinational negotiations and supply chain management. Not bad, right? But here's the kicker. Your daily tasks involve more than just sending emails and attending Zoom meetings. Instead, you're lugging spices, silk, and sometimes, believe it or not, live ostriches across some of the most inhospitable terrains known to man. Now, the journey itself was nothing short of an epic saga. Forget the cushy rides on well-paved roads. We're talking about trekking through endless deserts and perilous mountain passes. The blazing sun by day and freezing cold by night were your constant companions, along with the ever-present danger of running into bandits who saw you as a walking treasure chest. You'd think the desert might be the worst part, but then you'd hit the mountains and realize Mother Nature really likes to keep things interesting. Survival on these routes required more than just grit. It demanded ingenuity. Let's talk about navigation first. Nowadays, we rely on GPS to find the nearest coffee shop, but back then, merchants had to use the stars like a celestial Google Maps. They were trained in celestial navigation, which, despite sounding like something straight from a pirate movie, was a real science. The North Star was your guiding light, literally, and if you managed to keep that at your back, you'd be more or less on track. Local guides, often hired from nomadic tribes, were the original travel influencers, knowing every nook and cranny of these daunting landscapes like the back of their hands. And then there was the issue of sustenance. You weren't hitting up rest stops for a quick snack, that's for sure. Merchants had to carry enough provisions to last the journey, which often meant planning months in advance. Dried fruits, nuts, and salted meats became your diet staples, making that protein bar you nibbled on at the gym seem downright luxurious. On top of food, water was a prized commodity. A camel could go for a week without it, but you, not so much. Caravans would often plan their routes based on known water sources, which were about as reliable as a Wi-Fi connection in the middle of nowhere. Speaking of camels, let's address the absurdity of some of the cargo. Sure, silk and spices made sense, but why live ostriches? Well, these giant birds were considered exotic pets and symbols of wealth in places like Rome. Imagine the look on a Roman's face when a merchant delivered a live ostrich, feathers and all, right to their villa. It was the ancient equivalent of having a tiger in your backyard, completely impractical but undeniably impressive. But moving such a bizarre assortment of goods wasn't just a logistical challenge. It was an economic gamble. You had to consider tariffs, taxes, and the occasional bribe to local officials just to keep your cargo moving. It was capitalism at its rawest, a game where only the shrewdest players survived. And let's not sugarcoat it. Some merchants weren't above engaging in a bit of espionage, spying on rivals to get the upper hand. After all, knowing what goods were in demand could turn a modest profit into a king's ransom. As you trudged along these ancient trade routes, you became part of a vast network that stretched from the Roman Empire to the Han Dynasty. It was a melting pot of languages, religions, and ideas, with merchants acting as the cultural brokers. You might start your journey speaking Persian and end it with a working knowledge of Chinese, Greek, or any number of local dialects. Trade wasn't just about goods, it was about connecting worlds. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality was harsh, and the road was unforgiving. Disease, often picked up along the way, was a silent companion, and many merchants never returned home. Yet, for all its dangers, the Silk Road was a lifeline, bringing prosperity and progress to those daring enough to brave its challenges. So, next time you find yourself grumbling about a delayed package, spare a thought for those ancient merchants. They paved the way for the global economy we enjoy today, one step at a time, across deserts and mountains, with nothing but the stars and their wits to guide them. Ah, the Silk Road. It's not just a dusty trail of commerce, but a veritable Game of Thrones with less swordplay and more passive-aggressive bargaining. Let's delve into the social and political chess game that was the backbone of this colossal trade network. You see, running a transcontinental trade operation back in the day required more than just a solid business plan and a few camels. It was about navigating the geopolitical minefield that stretched from the Roman Empire to the Parthians, all the way to the Han Dynasty. And trust me, these guys weren't exactly the live and let live types. First up, let's talk about the Parthians, those enigmatic middlemen who controlled the crucial artery between the West and the East. Imagine them as the toll booth operators of the ancient world, except instead of loose change, you'd be parting with hefty bribes, gifts, to ensure your goods passed through their territory unscathed. The Parthians were masters of diplomacy and knew that playing nice with the Romans and the Chinese had its perks. They acted as the quintessential middle managers, juggling relationships with both sides to maximize their cut of the trade. Now, you might think these were benevolent guardians of commerce, but don't let the diplomatic facade fool you. The Parthians were shrewd operators, always ready to play one empire against the other if it meant a better deal. This wasn't some utopian free-market paradise. It was a cutthroat arena where alliances could shift as quickly as the desert sands. Merchants had to be consummate diplomats themselves, skilled in the art of flattery, negotiation, and when necessary, a bit of creative storytelling. Who said honesty was the best policy? Then there were the Romans, those toga-wearing powerhouses who had a taste for silk and a penchant for territorial expansion. For the Romans, silk was more than just a luxury fabric. It was a symbol of imperial prestige. But getting their hands on it required navigating a diplomatic dance with the Parthians, who were none too keen on letting Roman influence seep into their backyard. It was a precarious balance, a tug-of-war with merchants caught in the middle, trying to keep both sides happy while turning a tidy profit. Let's not forget about the Han Dynasty, the eastern bookend of this trade network. The Han emperors were no slouches when it came to diplomacy either. They understood the value of silk as a diplomatic tool and used it to grease the wheels of foreign relations. But while the Han were eager to foster trade, they were also wary of the cultural and political influences that came with it. This was a time when ideas traveled as freely as goods, and with them came the potential for upheaval. It was a double-edged sword, one that required careful management to ensure that the benefits of trade outweighed the risks. Now, if you think merchants were just helpless pawns in this geopolitical chess game, think again. Sure, they had to navigate a labyrinth of political intrigue, but they also knew how to work the system to their advantage. Merchants were the ultimate pragmatists, willing to cozy up to whoever held the power if it meant securing safe passage for their goods. They were the original networkers, building relationships not just for survival, but for prosperity. But let's strip away the romanticism of the benevolent merchant, the selfless purveyor of goods and goodwill. The reality was often less altruistic. Competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. Merchants weren't just competing against the elements and bandits. They were locked in a perpetual battle against each other. Double dealing was par for the course, and espionage was an accepted tactic. After all, knowing what your rivals were trading and which routes they were taking could mean the difference between success and ruin. And let's not forget the local powers that guarded the trade routes, each with their own set of rules and demands. Passing through these territories often required a delicate balancing act of appeasement and negotiation. A well-placed bribe could smooth over a multitude of issues, but it also added to the cost of doing business. It was an intricate web of obligations and expectations, one that required merchants to be as adept at diplomacy as they were at commerce. In summary, the Silk Road was less a singular path and more a complex tapestry of social and political interactions. It was a world where the line between friend and foe was often blurred, and where success hinged as much on political savvy as it did on business acumen. So next time you think of the Silk Road as just a series of dusty trails, remember the intricate dance of diplomacy and strategy that kept it alive. It was a world where merchants weren't just traders, but players in a grander game, navigating the shifting sands of power and profit with every step they took. And speaking of grand games, let's dive into the legends that have turned ancient Persian merchants into the rock stars of the trade routes. If you've ever heard of Sinbad the Sailor, you might think these guys were living a life straight out of an adventure novel, filled with exotic lands, mythical creatures, and treasure troves that would make a pirate blush. But let's peel back the layers of myth to see what's really underneath. And spoiler alert, it's not always as glamorous as the stories suggest. Sinbad, the hero of the 1001 Nights, is perhaps the most famous merchant-turned-adventurer. His tales are the stuff of legend, sailing across uncharted seas, battling monstrous creatures, and discovering islands filled with unimaginable riches. The allure of such stories, filled with high stakes and narrow escapes, captivated audiences for centuries, painting merchants as daring explorers rather than the gritty traders they often were. But let's snap back to reality for a moment. The actual Persian merchants were less about swashbuckling adventures and more about grueling logistics. While Sinbad might have fought off giant birds and narrowly escaped shipwrecks, the real-life challenges were often more mundane and far less epic. Imagine spending hours haggling over the price of a bolt of silk or negotiating safe passage with local chieftains who were more interested in your goods than your tales of adventure. Now, why did these myths become so popular? Well, part of it was the allure of the unknown. The Silk Road stretched across continents, and for those who never left their hometowns, it was a source of endless fascination. Stories like Sinbad's provided a glimpse into a world that was both mysterious and tantalizingly dangerous. It was the ancient version of a blockbuster movie, complete with special effects and a plot that kept you on the edge of your seat. But these myths also served another purpose. They enhanced the allure of the goods themselves. When you hear tales of silks coming from lands filled with fabulous beasts and hidden treasures, it adds an extra layer of mystique to that scarf you're buying. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a slice of adventure, a tangible connection to the far-flung corners of the earth. It was marketing 101, centuries before anyone thought to put ads on Instagram. Yet, for all the romance, the real lives of these merchants were often anything but. They weren't typically fending off fantastical creatures, but were instead dealing with very real threats like bandits and corrupt officials. The journey from the Persian Empire to, say, the Roman frontiers was a perilous one, fraught with risks that were far more likely to end in financial ruin than in a treasure-laden island. As one ancient merchant lamented in a letter discovered near the ancient Silk Road, "The road is long, the profits uncertain, and the only certainty is the toll it takes on one's spirit." Despite this, the myths persisted and even grew over time, influencing how societies viewed trade and those who engaged in it. The romanticized image of the merchant as a brave adventurer helped elevate their status, turning what was essentially a commercial endeavor into a noble pursuit. In a world where social status was often tied to land ownership and noble birth, the idea that one could gain prestige through trade was revolutionary. However, the reality was far more complex. Merchants operated in a world of shifting alliances and cutthroat competition. They were often seen with suspicion by those in power, who both relied on their goods and distrusted their growing influence. It was a double-edged sword. The wealth they accumulated gave them power, but it also made them targets for both envy and exploitation. And here's where the myths served another purpose. They provided a convenient narrative that both merchants and rulers could use to their advantage. For merchants, the tales of adventure and danger added an aura of heroism to their endeavors, helping to justify their wealth and status. For rulers, these stories served as propaganda, demonstrating the reach and influence of their realms, while also romanticizing the dangers of the unknown lands beyond their borders. Yet, not all accounts were so flattering. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, for instance, described merchants as wandering vagabonds, driven more by greed than by any noble sense of adventure. To some, they were little more than profiteers, exploiting the desires and curiosities of others for their own gain. It was a harsh critique, but one that resonated with the suspicion that often surrounded those who seemed to profit from the toil of others. So, what's the takeaway here? While the myths of Sinbad and others provided a veneer of romance, the reality was often a much grittier affair. The merchants of old were not just adventurers or greedy profiteers. They were complex figures navigating a world rife with danger and opportunity. They were pioneers of their time, laying the groundwork for the global trade networks we take for granted today. As we ponder these legends and realities, it's crucial to remember that both played vital roles in shaping the world as we know it. The myths added a sheen of glamour, making the everyday toil of trade seem like a grand adventure. Meanwhile, the harsh realities ensured that only the most resilient and savvy could survive and thrive. And while Sinbad's tales might have been exaggerated, they captured the imagination of countless generations, inspiring merchants and explorers alike to push the boundaries of the known world. They remind us that while the road may be long and the profits uncertain, the spirit of adventure and the lure of the unknown continue to drive humanity forward, one step and one trade at a time. The legends might be larger than life, but they are rooted in the everyday grit and determination that define the true spirit of the Silk Road. And so, the legends of Sinbad and his fellow merchants served as the backdrop for the very real and gritty business of trade on the Silk Road. But what was it that really allowed Persian merchants to not just survive, but thrive in this ancient world of commerce? Well, let's dive into the economic, social, and political trifecta that made these merchants the OG hustlers of their time. First up, economics. The Silk Road was the Bitcoin of its day, volatile, risky, but potentially hugely rewarding. Persian merchants were adept at reading the market like a stock ticker, knowing exactly when to buy low and sell high. They understood the concept of supply and demand long before Adam Smith was a glimmer in the Enlightenment's eye. Silk, spices, and other exotic goods weren't just items. They were investments, each with the potential to yield a massive return. And let's not forget the sheer scale of this operation. We're talking about a trade network that spanned roughly 7,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, with Persian merchants smack dab in the middle of it all. It wasn't just a road, it was an economic superhighway. But what about the social factors? The Persians weren't just skilled traders, they were cultural chameleons. Imagine trying to sell silk to a Roman senator while discussing Confucian philosophy over tea. These merchants were the original polyglots, effortlessly switching between Persian, Greek, Chinese, and whatever local dialect the situation called for. Cultural exchange was their secret weapon, and they wielded it with the finesse of a political operative. While they were busy trading goods, they were also trading ideas, religious beliefs, and technologies, effectively acting as the internet routers of the ancient world. Now, onto the political landscape. If you think modern-day geopolitics is a tangled mess, try navigating the power dynamics between the Roman Empire, the Parthians, and the Han dynasty. The Persian merchants were the diplomats of the trade route, their every move calculated to avoid stepping on imperial toes. They became masters of the art of the deal before it was a best-selling book. And speaking of deals, let's talk about the Parthian middlemen. These guys were the gatekeepers, and navigating their territory was like playing a high-stakes game of Monopoly where every property was a toll booth. Yet, Persian merchants managed to maintain a delicate balance, ensuring that goods flowed smoothly despite a landscape littered with political landmines. So, what about their legacy? These merchants laid the groundwork for what we now call globalization. Long before anyone coined the term global supply chain, Persian merchants were its living embodiment. And let's not underestimate their role in shaping the cultural landscape. The spread of Buddhism along these routes is a testament to how trade was about more than just goods. It was a conduit for ideas and beliefs, a transcontinental tweet storm in a time of parchment and ink. Now, just for a moment, let's imagine how these ancient traders might fare in today's gig economy. Picture a Persian merchant as an Uber driver, except instead of passengers, they're ferrying crates of silk, spices, and occasionally a live ostrich. Their Yelp reviews would probably read something like, "Arrived on time, but the camel smelled, 4 stars." Or perhaps they'd be on eBay selling vintage silk with descriptions that include tales of treacherous mountain passes and diplomatic negotiations. Their Instagram would be filled with selfies in front of the Great Wall, captioned with hashtags like #TraderLife and #SilkGoals. But in all seriousness, their legacy is profound. They were pioneers of a world without borders, traversing landscapes that would daunt even the most seasoned traveler today. They didn't just pave the way for future trade. They laid the foundations of a connected world, one that thrives on exchange, both cultural and commercial. Their story is one of romance and reality, a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest for prosperity. As we reflect on their storied history, it's clear that the Persian merchants weren't just traders, they were visionaries. They saw beyond the horizon, understanding that wealth wasn't just measured in gold and silk, but in knowledge and influence. They were the original global citizens, bridging worlds and shaping the course of history with every deal struck and every mile traveled. So next time you're waiting for your Amazon package to arrive, think of those hardy merchants of old who navigated deserts and mountains with nothing more than a map drawn on the night sky and a caravan of camels. They remind us that the spirit of adventure and the drive for connection are timeless, transcending the ages and continuing to shape the world we live in today.